The Red Hand. The glenside shuddered with the sound of 1,000 shotguns. The echo bounced from hill to hill. The orange and purple mushroom expanded rapidly to tinge the sky. Smoke wisped towards the heavens in strands of black and gray flecked with an ember glow. It was an awesome sight, but there were no spectators in the near vicinity to gasp at the immense explosion. Except in the far distance a pair of binoculars focused. The brown leather gloves gripped the eyepiece tightly as he strained to pick up details of the flying debris. As the outbreath subsided and the detritus settled, he had one last stare before starting the engine of the blue Land Rover and swinging it onto the brown dirt track which led to the only road in and out of Glen Esk. He pulled the scarf tightly over his face with one hand and held the steering wheel tightly with his other hand. The road past Tarfside was empty and he passed nothing on the 13-mile drive from the top of Glen Esk downhill to the main road and then onto Edsall. The old U.S. military base was empty nowadays and he glanced at the remnants of old wooden barracks. He crossed the A9 and into Brechin. Beltane's Motors were open for business and its main workshop/garage had its doors open. He parked the Land Rover inside and shut the door. A grizzled gray-overalled man came out of the office and he handed him the keys. In return he got the keys for the small Renault parked in the forecourt. Billy McKay drove at a steady inconspicuous speed out onto the A9 heading south to Dundee. It was a day later before anyone had noticed that the small whitewashed farm cottage and its outbuildings was no longer there. Mrs. Irvin, the schoolteacher, had decided to visit her school on the Saturday afternoon to pick up some school work to be marked. She had decided to have her lunch up at the ruined castle by Lochley, and just as she had settled to her coffee and sandwiches she glanced across towards Mount Keene, the Munro visible from Glen Esk. She gasped when she noticed that the idyllic Highland homestead was splintered into 1,000 bits strewn over the glenside. In a reflex action she flipped open her mobile. There was no signal. She drove full pelt down the winding road and into Brechin police station. The phone rang. It was a Friday afternoon and the late autumn sun was streaming through Johnston's office window. The dancing sunbeams dappled a motley pattern on the whitewashed walls. Johnston speaking. Jock, it's Len. Afternoon, Chief. Just had a call from Police Scotland. They are wondering if we can spare anyone who knows about the Liverpool drugs run. Apparently Manchester are snowed under at the MO. You want me to go? I know you've got relatives up there. A cousin. You could visit him and take in a bit of fishing and golf if the road leads nowhere, so to speak. Where? Tayside. Perfect. James lives in Arbroath. Who's going to look after things here? Jim Parker starts back Monday if he gets the medical all clear today. Okay. So when do they want me up in Tayside? Wednesday. They've organized digs for a couple of weeks. Thanks. I'll see you Tuesday 2 p.m. and you can hand over any open case stuff for Jim Parker. Okay. Have a good weekend. Chief Superintendent Williams replaced the receiver. Johnston was alone with his thoughts. He wasn't leaving much behind, only a couple of half-closed burglaries and a serial flasher. Even a half-fit Parker could handle that. Jock had been born in Scotland. He was orphaned after a car crash and now his only surviving relative was a cousin who he knew was suffering from a degenerative muscle disease. It's strange, he thought, how life irons out all the kinks and folds. He'd been meaning to visit Jamie for at least a year and kept finding reasons to put it off. But this time the higher powers were broaching no compromise. D.I. Ramsay knelt and sifted through some of the debris near the blown-out window frame. Forensics were there as well. A veritable swarm of activity was going on and Ramsay didn't want to be accused of messing up potential evidence. Pete. Yeah. What have you found? A body? Not exactly, it's a hand. D.I. Ramsay got up and sauntered over to Forensics Officer Bill Smith. Smith pointed to the ground and there in all its bloodied glory was a severed hand with a full set of digits but no body. Great, it's a start. Now let's find the rest of the body. The white-suited team of swarming ants scoured the ground around what remained of Ardbeg Cottage. They moved with fixed downward stares as the overhead helicopter whirred and the sun rose gradually to its zenith. Whatever caused this explosion was a mighty big bang, because there's not a lot left except the hand. It's bloody well incinerated everything. Yes. And the debris is lying for at least 100 yards. The other thing that's a bit weird, Pete, there's no obvious gas supply into the cottage. Yet I noticed that as well. Jim Smith handed Ramsey a piece of evidence wrapped in polythene. These are the only other items we found that might be evidential in some way. Ramsey looked at the broken glass through the polythene and saw the beautiful rainbow colors diffuse through the mediums. Looks like a beaker of some sort, Jim, definitely not a drinking glass. Ramsey was very careful to open the second polythene bag. The torn shards of an old leather-bound notebook were barely legible through the ash and burn marks. We'll be lucky if there are a few words readable. Okay, thanks, Jim. Leave a couple of guys on watch for next 24 hours and cordon it off for about 100 yards. As he drove slowly down the glen, Ramsey felt that ominous tug in his stomach that was telling him this was going to be awkward. We've got a cottage with no traceable owner and a tenant who is unknown to the locals and not registered to vote. We have a massive explosion in a cottage with no gas supply. Ramsey mumbled inwardly. It's got to be drugs. Ramsey got the all clear back at Tayside HQ to phone Lancashire for some expert backup on the notorious Liverpool to Scotland drugs run. Beltane Motors was a small garage/workshop which repaired motors and traded small time in used cars. John Houston had run it for 10 years. Mr. McKay paid him for the odd job once or twice a year. He was working alone today and he knew it was going to be a difficult job. But for £15,000 in cash it was never going to be easy. He slipped on the ski mask and pulled it down to cover his straggly grey beard and podgy pocked face. He opened the boot of the Land Rover McKay had left and saw the body trussed like a stuffed Christmas turkey. It started to squirm like an oversized trout and he hesitated. Head first, he thought, health and safety. He bundled the body down onto the workshop floor and using the car winch he hooked it up and raised it. Operating the mechanical levers manually, he lowered it down into the basement storage unit beneath the main workshop. He closed the wooden trapdoors and descended the stairs into the windowless 10 × 10 feet space. You'll be fine. Don't panic. It's a holiday. Bit of time away from the worries of the world. Houston closed the door and went to the side office and stuck the kettle on. This was a time to think and think clear. Billy McKay entered the hotel through the revolving glass doors at the side of the building. He caught glimpses of himself flashing on and off in the polished glass. He looked quite dapper in the grey marquee suit he had purchased a day before flying out to Geneva. As a rule he did not wear suits, but today he felt important, and indeed today was important for the future of the Ulster Protection Force. The UPF was very much a little brother to the bigger and more powerful Ulster defence groupings which had mushroomed since the Troubles. And he was flattered to have received the call from a Mr. Schmidt to attend this meeting. He felt at home in Geneva. As a man dedicated to preserving a tradition which supported Protestantism in general and Presbyterianism in particular, this was a special place to be. During the Reformation, Geneva had been a refuge for persecuted Protestants to escape the clutches of Rome. These refugees had not been universally welcomed. A proportion of the indigenous population took the view they were asylum seekers who had half an eye on a better way of life. For many, however, there was a warm welcome for Presbyterian brothers. Whether any of this might resonate with Schmidt was unlikely, but as McKay had never met him, he didn't know for sure. Sitting near the reception desk wearing a dark suit with a violet in the lapel was a tall, thin German/Swiss gentleman with close-cropped blonde hair. He looked vibrant behind the taut 40-year-old skin. McKay walked over and offered his thick calloused hand. The elegant Swiss gentleman stood up to his full 6 feet 3 inches height, and looking down on the barrel-built McKay squeezed his hand tightly. There was nothing in the handshake to tell McKay he was friend or foe. The steely grey eyes gave nothing away either. The Calvin suite on level 2 was big enough for a meeting of about 10 people, but only McKay and Schmidt occupied the 2 leather Chesterfields. "Did you have a nice flight?" McKay looked down from the window and could see the clockwork movement of the restrained Swiss drivers moving like automatons through the main roads. Not bad, McKay muttered with that strong Belfast burr. Business. Yes. Schmidt handed him a large envelope which contained 3 A4 photographs. On the back of each was written a 500-word biography with Cove. At the bottom was the word delete in capitals. McKay studied the 3 photos and noted the biographies. Can I ask why? No, Schmidt replied with a trace of annoyance. Why do you need to know? Well, I am a representative of an organization. There is a ruling committee. Yes. But effectively what you say goes. I would not have approached you without some research. I can push things through just now, but maybe in the future I might need to answer for things. We all have to answer for things, sooner or later. McKay was taken aback by the semi-religious inference in the statement. There is €2 million or a delivery of 500 NATO Imbal assault rifles. It is your choice. McKay looked hard into his eyes. This was serious business. Why do you think we might need assault rifles? There is a peace process in place. Well, my informants suggest that you do not have the security that others enjoy. McKay was getting peeved with the bloody superior German who had it all worked out. Is that not a mite risky for you, smuggling arms into an EU country? Well, after Brexit it might be extremely difficult for you to get this kind of help from your European brothers. Indeed. Let me pass this one on to the committee. I'll give you a decision within the week by the usual channels. Need to be quicker than that, these guns are warm. The waitress knocked gently on the door and Schmidt, the consummate gentleman, rose and levered the handle to open. The attractive-looking young Austrian woman placed the silver tray with the coffees on the table which sat between Schmidt and McKay. Schmidt was momentarily swayed by her innocent beauty, but McKay did not betray any weakness. Schmidt followed her with his eyes and then went out and checked the corridor before resuming his seat. Do we have a deal? McKay stretched out his arm and let his stumpy fingers embrace Schmidt's milky white appendage. The airport was busy. Too busy for McKay's liking, and he felt a wave of paranoid nausea, a symptom of the troubles, overtake him momentarily at customs. Europol were unlikely to have an interest in him, but if Schmidt was something other than a Swiss businessman with an interest in assassinating 3 UK citizens, then there could be problems. It was early morning when Johnston and Ramsey got into the black sedan Sid car. The road out of Dundee was quiet until they hit the Kingsway. Johnston's bacon and eggs were still swilling about as Ramsey fired up the sedan after the last set of traffic lights before hitting the main A9 to Aberdeen. Did you get settled in okay? For a police house it's very comfy. Well, you know, if there's anything you need just ask. Will do. What's the meat of this case, Pete? All I know is that a cottage mysteriously exploded. That's not far from what we know. Basically, there was an explosion around about 4 p.m. on Friday. There is no gas supply to the house. And we cannot find a body. There is a hand, but none of the debris contained what we might regard as human remains. The last record of ownership comes from title deeds in 1805. There is no record of any assigned lease, and there is no council tax record or electoral registration for the property. Locals say that they never met any occupants, but did confirm a grey Land Rover driving up and parking at the cottage on a few occasions. There is also a record showing that lights could be seen on in the kitchen over winter on occasions. We did find the mangled metal shell of what looks like a power generator. At this stage we doubt the generator could have caused an explosion of that magnitude. So what's the big deal? Well, ordinarily you might say an empty house, perhaps a house under adverse possessory ownership or squatting to you and me, just explodes. But why such a big explosion, and who owns the hand? If we just file a report as unexplained and we don't follow this up, then we are going to look very silly if there's a spate of exploding body parts peppering some of Scotland's finest tourist hotspots. You think there might be a drug trafficking link? Maybe to Liverpool. Maybe. Most of the drugs coming into Scotland, especially heroin, is coming from down south, and most of that seems to originate in Liverpool. There was a flood of ecstasy, amphetamines, and skunk hitting the east coast of Scotland last summer. We traced most of that to Merseyside and we banged up to rights a few of the major felons. Not all. No, the bigger players are still loose. They're directing things from a distance. Before we can move forward with this, we have got to know who was in that house when it exploded, and failing that, who had been visiting the property. Johnston mused. Indeed. It is a well-known fact that remote rural locations in Scotland are the main holding place for illicit substances which are to be traded. Remote means nobody bothers you and deals can be done without prying eyes. Yes, and it saves on installing double-enforced metal doors. Half the multi-stories in Manchester are sealed up like Fort Knox. But at least we know who is who and what they are up to. Forensics did not find any traces of commonly used illegals around the cottage, but they did recover some broken chemist's glass beakers which they suspect might have been used for producing something for consumption. If not ecstasy or acid, then some legal highs. God, this is getting complicated. What I'll do at my end is get Jim Parker down at Waddle to liaise with Manchester and Liverpool Drugs Squad and get a master list of drug dealers and networks which have been known to stretch distribution to any Scotland. We'll see if we can track any of their movements over the border in last 6 weeks and see if we can link anything to this area. Okay. That helps. Ramsay negotiated the lost T-mile of road in silent contemplation whilst Johnston took in the stunning scenery of green and purple from the head of the glen. The old ruined castle was just visible further on, with its broken grey stone highlighting the lush greenery beyond. Johnston got out first and felt his boots crunch into part of the shattered window frame left behind by forensics. Where exactly did they find the hand? Johnston queried. Ramsay marched over to the spot about 20 yards from the burnt-out remains of the cottage. He pointed to a spot near some splintered wood from a window frame. Johnston scoured the area for anything forensics might have missed. About 30 yards from the burnt-out cottage, Johnston spotted the Forensic Crime Scene Investigation Unit. Johnston wandered over to Bill Smith, the chief SOCO. Anything interesting? Smith was carefully inserting the fragment of paper into a poly bag using specially designed forceps. Just this scrap of paper. It's the only paper product not incinerated in the aftermath of the blast. Johnston peered quizzically. Look but do not touch was the motto. He could see a small scrawl of what looked like handwriting and a symbol, of some intertwining chords. Could be a caduceus. The ancient symbol of the medical profession. Or maybe not. Johnston peered into the plastic poly bag. Bill, if that turns out to be handwriting, can you fire off a copy to me ASAP? Time's crucial in this one and I don't want to hang about waiting on reports. Okay. I'll make that a priority. Anything else other than the hand that might interest us? Like a body? Strangely enough, no. Other than this plastic print. Smith pointed down at a beautifully impressed boot print whose ridges and curves had all the virginity of a patterned clay pot fresh out of the kiln. Johnston stroked the grizzled stubble on his bulbous chin and then peered closer at the size 10 imprint. We've now got a bodiless, one-handed man, or woman, who is murdered by a one-legged hobnail-booted assassin. Perhaps not. Most likely he has landed one boot in this muddy morass and placed the other boot on the wooden slat there. Does this tell us anything other than the assassin had long legs and a long stride? Not really, but we can make a measured guess at his approximate height by the stride length. You can extrapolate data from that. Well, before we had fingerprinting, the main identification method was using proportional body ratio matches. The guy that developed it was called Ad. That's interesting. We'll also get the boot print examined. Should be able to get a match there, and then you've got to hope it's not a popular brand. Not Doc Martens then. Hopefully not. What about fingerprints? What about them? Are there going to be any? Obviously, the hand down there is going to have 5. But how useful they're going to be is anyone's guess. We'll run them through the national database and see if we can get any matches. DNA. We'll take a sample from the hand. We'll also look for hair amongst the debris. But I've got to say, in 20 years in this job, this has got to be the strangest crime scene I have ever visited. There is no body, and significantly there are no obvious signs of blood. We could have got a DNA sample from any blood at the scene. Maybe he's blown up the cottage then come back for the body parts to avoid identification difficulties. But all that blood, how did he get rid of that? If he did come back, then maybe he left the print on the way back. Certainly the footprint is facing towards the cottage. What I'll do is arrange for laser torches to scour the whole scene. Maybe we can pick up some fibers or other traces on the wood or elsewhere. Johnston looked momentarily perplexed as he looked into Smith's squinting eyes. The hand of God. This hand is all we've got. Either the handwriting sample or the DNA sample comes up trumps, or we're goosed on this one. We can get the DNA samples and matching done fairly quickly, but the forensic document examination may take a few days. We'd have to send the samples to a private lab. How vital is it? Well, I'm just thinking, if we know what's written, we might have an idea what was going on in the cottage. If the caduceus symbol relates to what is written, then we have a clue. Apart from them, it might be handy, if you'll pardon the pun, for identification. We can see if there is a match with any suspects we manage to get. Okay, but you can't be sure the hand of God, as you called it, wrote the fragment. No, that's true. Johnston offered Smith a chocolate toffee from the near-empty packet. The wizened forensic Soko took two. He lifted the forensic mask from the helmet and inserted the comfort shoes. Johnston carefully picked his way round to the back of the cottage and looked over to Mount Keen. It was garlanded in a misty halo. Was there anybody in the cottage when he planted whatever it was? Could he have come from Mount Keen? Johnston went back to Smith. Need you to expand the crime scene. Check the tire tracks at least up to Lockley and down to Tarfizide. Okay, Jock, by the way, we found this. Smith held up a badly blackened piece of metal mangled into a Bolazzi sculpture. Suspect this was holding the explosives, or if it was an accident, then this was close to the explosion. Progress. Yes. Belfast Airport was quiet when Billy Mackay strode through the arrivals gate and into Costas Cafe. There was tall gentleman with a trench coat at the magazine stand and an elderly woman with a heavy pair of support stockings in front of him in the coffee queue. There was no sign of Arnie Smith, who was supposed to be there to assist Billy. Still, it was a bit early for Arnie. 8 a.m. was on the sharp side for Arnie's obligatory hangovers. Billy used his mobile to order his own private taxi. The shining BMW picked him up from the front of the airport, and he said nothing to Ron Paisley, who drove impassively through the morning rush hour. Back at the Shankill Road, Mackay got out and nodded to Paisley before shouldering his luggage back and making his way up the pathway to his reinforced council semi. The orange and blue wooden front door slid open with a graceful ease after one turn of the Yale. The heavy metal door behind it took a bit more effort, as the two mortise locks were deliberately stiff. Inside the house, the cork-lined walls gave a sound restricting security the building, so that any prying ears might be, at least a little bit deaf-end. Billy was home. There was no wife to greet him, or for that matter doting children to shout "Daddy's home." Instead, there were 5 stocky-built middle-aged men sitting around a pinewood IKEA kitchen table. "Coffee, Billy?" "Strong one." "Flight okay?" "Not bad." "Good result for the Jers." Billy stared across at his second-in-command, Raymond Cameron. Raymond was a red-hot Glasgow Rangers fan, as was Billy, but this was not the time to indulge in trivial small talk. Raymond got the message. The other 3 said nothing. Billy slapped an envelope on the table as he slipped into the chair with his extra strong Nescafe. Raymond picked up the envelope and took out the photos of the 3 men that Schmidt had given him. "They're no good lookers, are they?" Mackay nodded. The remark was on the flippant side, but maybe it was time to lighten up a little. "Eyes too close together." The assembled group laughed out loud at Mackay's observation, which was a stereotype often implied about their Irish enemies. "Are these fellows for the off?" "Read the back," Mackay ordered, flipping over the first photo of Joseph Wrightson, the PhD chemistry graduate of Cambridge University. Well, he's a clever bugger. Raymond laughed. Compared to you he is, Jimmy Smith chipped in as he waited nervously for a positive response to his humorous quip. It didn't come. We've got to nail him and the other two. There was a silence around the room as the atmosphere grew a bit heavier. Why does this German guy want rid of them? That's what I asked, but he says he can't tell us. You mean he won't tell us? Billy looked menacingly across the table at his second-in-command, who realized his error and offered Billy the plate with the biscuits. He's not going to tell us, and that's all we need to know. What do we get out of this, Billy? Jimmy Smith queried. Well, it's a choice. £2 million in euros or 500 NATO Imbal assault rifles. The two quiet men at the back gasped slightly. Jesus Christ. Raymond managed in a tone between blasphemy and wonder. Deal or no deal, Billy offered the assembled crew. They were still dumbstruck. Do we need the guns? There will be more weapons than members, Ken Robinson queried, finally breaking his silence. Money or guns, it's always the question. We can always turn the guns into money later. If Brexit goes belly up, it might be a nice little insurance policy. Make sure nobody strong-arms us into a united Ireland. Besides, we'd be the best armed militia from any side. People would be flocking to join us, McKay stated with authority. Robinson looked hard across the table at McKay. I'm not sure about this, Billy. I'd like to know who these men are. It's going to be on our conscience. Besides, there's still a peace process of sorts in place. Thank you, Holy Willie, McKay sneered. This ain't the boys' brigade. When you signed up for the UPF you swore to protect Ulster. Now I'm giving you a chance to do that. If this Brexit deal goes sour and they try to make the border on the mainland, then we are back to the Battle of the Boyne. There was an uneasy silence. Raymond stroked his grey-bearded chin and broke the silence. How do we get paid, and what's the guarantee? Guns or money? It's 20% in advance and the rest released on evidence. Before McKay could finish, Ken Robinson, the 40-year-old bachelor and founding member, stood up. Leave me out of this one. It's too hot and I never signed up to see off innocent men. Well, piss off. If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. We've no room for old women. There's no innocence in this world, Pastor. Ken Robinson said nothing more. He marched his 6'2" lithe frame straight out of the kitchen door and out of Billy's safe house. There was a funereal silence which lasted a full minute. This meeting's adjourned. Reconvene same time tomorrow, McKay ordered. Ramsey negotiated the tricky last mile of the Glen before hitting the main road into Edsall. You fancy a coffee, or something stronger? Johnston glanced with an appreciative nod. Bit of brunch might be nice. Ramsey pulled the sedan over into the Esk Hotel car park. They were the only visitors. The barmaid looked excited. It was the first customers in 2 days and the chance to impress with her bartending skills. What would you gentlemen like? Are you serving lunches yet? Johnston asked. Well, not officially, but the chef could be persuaded. What are you after? Ramsey picked up the plastic menu sheet and searched for something filling but not too fattening, as his middle-aged girth was already heaving at the sound of food. I'll have a cheese toastie and a double Talisker, Johnston suggested, if the chef's up for it. Make mine a plate of beans and chips with a Pepsi. Ramsey looked at Johnston's reddened cheeks and recognized a man with a fondness for the whiskey Oistveig. I'll go and see if I can find the manager while we're waiting for the nosh, Johnston said, sidling off his bar stool. The manager was busy leafing through a pile of invoices in the small side office. Can I help you? Johnston whipped out the newly issued Police Scotland ID. Making some inquiries about the exploding cottage up the Glen. Oh, Ardbeg House. Don't have a clue. What about visitors to the hotel? Any of them ever give a clue they might be staying or visiting up there? Not really. The manager was stroking his thinly stubbed chin. Johnston could almost hear the wheels turning. Nothing at all. Well, Now that I think about, there was a visitor to the hotel in December who stayed overnight because the road up the glen was impassable, snow was up to our necks. You think he might have been heading to the cottage? I don't know, I seem to remember he said he was visiting the area, but it was late at night and he'd left it late to get a room. Might have tried to get up the glen and had to turn back. Anyway, to check who he was. The register will have a name and there might be a payment record if he didn't pay cash. Johnston's eyebrows tensed and the brow furrowed. What type of car was he driving? Couldn't recall that in a oneer, but I could back-check CCTV. I would need to request the tapes from head office, take a bit of time. We are having problems with the licensing board at the moment, it's taking most of my time. You couldn't? I'll see what I can do if it hurries along the tape. Thanks. I'll see if I can bring up room records just now. The thin middle-aged manager gave the mouse a couple of tickles and room records appeared. This looks like it might be it. James Oswald, room 21. Vauxhall Corsa 2AL Chem 7. That'll save the bother of CCTV. Thanks for that. Just order the CCTV footage anyway, 'cause we'd like to know the direction he comes into your car park from and the direction he leaves in. Geesh. That's a bit of work. Look, you're a strategically important tourist business. I don't think you'll have any licensing problems if the police point out the emergency refuge status of an establishment like this out in the middle of nowhere. Okay, thanks. By the way, did he have an accent? That's pushing my memory, but I think it was an English accent. What kind of English accent? A bit like yours. Thanks for your help, mister. Swanky, Bill Swanky. Johnston nodded and made his way back to the welcome side of a cheese toastie and double Talisker. A wee ray of light, Peter. How? Manager had unknown visitor, possibly visiting the Glen in December. But that was 8 months ago. Yes. But it's all we've got. He had an accent like mine. You couldn't have done it? No, but it lends a bit of weight to drugs theory. At the end of the day, someone blew up that cottage. They must have had a reason. Either it was a drugs war score settling, maybe someone wants to destroy evidence of something in the cottage. Liverpool drugs baron settles with slow-paying distributor? That's all very well, but there's no body so far. Forensics are going to be 48 hours assessing the DNA profile of the hairy hand. Okay. Meanwhile, I think it's urgent we get a trace done on a James Oswald. This is likely to be a false name, but we need to get that confirmed. A better lead might be the car registration. Even if it's false, there's a chance we can use our confidants or grasses, whatever you prefer, to get the actual vehicle engine details. Assuming it's been fixed in northwest England. Pete Ramsey looked encouraged, and he knew he was working with a true professional. Billy left the Argyle bar. A car swung at a 45-degree angle into the curbside at speed just in front of him and parked on the double yellow lines with half a wheel on the curb. McKay pointed to the lines. When the balding builder got out, McKay said, "What about the lines?" The careless driver smirked as he turned to go to the wonky Chinese takeaway. McKay picked up a half brick from the doorway and launched it through the windscreen. The balding middle-aged man lunged forward and caught McKay's right fist full on. Billy kicked him around the head for a full minute and left him to bleed. When he came out of the Chinese, he was still lying there. Billy poured some piping hot curry and chips over his bleeding ear. He could hear the seagulls swoop and swarm over the dangerous driver. The door was locked and the blinds were down. A glass of single malt was half hidden in amongst the detritus that lay strewn on Johnston's desk. So far, the only lead on the car which was logged on the hotel CCTV was that of James Oswald. Checks with DVLA confirmed Oswald was a false name and the car was registered to a Paul Wrightson. He appeared to be a company director based in Edinburgh, aged 32 and unmarried. Why had he used a false name? And why visit Brechin for no obvious business reason in the middle of December? Johnston was waiting anxiously for further background, and suspiciously it seemed Wrightson was not easily contactable. Of equal interest was the CCTV image of a blue Land Rover caught heading off the A9 into the Brechin Castle Centre 2 days before the explosion was reported. There was just enough clarity to give a registration number. Johnston was staring ahead at the Chinese lady who had hung dutifully in the Brechin office for 35 years when the phone tone jerked him out of his temporary stupor. Johnston picked up the blotched fax message on the office desk he was sharing with Ramsey. It was from Jim Parker down in Lancashire. Tayside Police HQ. From D.S. Parker, What'll Sid? ATT, D.I. Jock Johnston. Checked out registration on Blue Land Rover. Links to William McKay. Aged 38. Lives Belfast. 8 convictions. Johnston digested the information. He phoned the switchboard. He was redirected to Bill Struth, RUC, HQ, Belfast Division. Hello, Mr. Struth, D.I. Jock Johnston. What'll Sid? I'm helping Police Scotland with an investigation. I was wondering if you could do me a favor and run a check on William McKay, aged 38, lives 89 Shankhill Road. When do you need it? Yesterday, but make it as quick as you can and I'll try and return the favor. It was a long 90 minutes before Struth got back with the necessaries. You've caught a real hot one here, Jock. 6 violent assault convictions, a manslaughter charge and an attempted rape charge. Reputed to be a leader of the UPP paramilitary group. And I can confirm that he is because we, or should I say MI5, have got someone on the inside. I'm really in your debt, Bill. Could I possibly arrange to meet this inside man? Well, that is not a usual protocol. Where is all this leading? That's just it, Bill, we're not sure. It could be a matter of state security or it might be nothing. Look if you can play it big on the state security card and I'll see what I can do. Johnston was not sure whether he was happy or sad. The first shafts of light in an awkward case had glinted into view, but it meant there was going to be a few geographical and territorial lines that might have to be crossed. Is there any link between this Wrightson guy and the Belfast tough nut? Johnston mused to himself. It was 4:30 p.m. next day when Johnston landed at Belfast Airport. The Irish Sea had looked choppy and his boiled egg breakfast was well scrambled by the time the easyJet had eased its way onto the tarmac. A uniformed plotter from the RUC was there to meet him. This was a privilege the Garda had not conferred upon him on his last visit to Dublin. But perhaps there was more reason to worry about his personal safety in the troubled north. RUC headquarters was an imposing building. Bill Struth was there to greet him at the charge desk. Struth was a stout, squat figure who looked like an oversized Teletubby with an austere black jumpsuit. The RUC metal badges were shined to a polished mirror finish. He showed the slightly weary Johnston into the interview room at the side of the charge desk. Coffee. Strong, please. Milk and 2 sugars, Johnston advised. Struth instructed the desk sergeant on the required beverages before resuming his seat across the desk from Johnston. Is there where I interview him? No. HQ is a bit sensitive. I've arranged to meet him in an old warehouse down at the docks. Right next to the disused platforms where the Titanic was put together, ironically enough, Struth stated, half smiling. What's wrong with the station? Nothing, except walls have ears. We could have brought him under a blanket, but the problem is we have 1 or 2 officers who are, how I can say it, ultra loyal. Johnston understood the meaning. There were some officers who might have loyalties to paramilitary groups which transcended even Her Majesty's police force. Besides M.I.5. Insisted he is interviewed where they can physically keep an eye on proceedings. When do we meet him? Whenever you like. He works in the docks. Okay. Let's get it done. Struth got up and instructed the desk sergeant. He then phoned secure line to the informer. Within 10 minutes the plain Ford Focus appeared as if by magic at the car park. The drive through Belfast's gloomier suburbs was an experience for Johnston. The shimmering Titanic Museum momentarily lifted Johnston's spirits as he was dazzled by its sober simplicity. Belfast docks were much more menacing. The old industrial crane stood motionless at Shed 58. The old warehouse had a wooden side door which led to the supervision office, and when Struth and Johnston went inside, a tall, lean middle-aged man with greased back hair sat lounging back behind the desk. "Pleased to meet you, I'm Ken Robinson," he said, holding out a rough slender hand. "D.I. Jock Johnston. Police Scotland." Struth nodded across to Robinson and he brought the long, denim legs down off the table before leaning across the desk to stare Johnston down. "What can I be helping you with, D.I. Johnston?" "I need to know about Billy McKay, his whereabouts in the last 10 days. What he has been up to in a general sense." "That chite," Robinson managed with a grimace. "We are concerned that he may have been involved in a criminal offence in mainland Scotland." Robinson looked across at Struth and he nodded. This was the reassurance Robinson needed. There was no special branch minder here and he didn't know if Johnston was wired. Struth was standing guarantor for his security. "Well, Billy's a bit of a wild one, ego gets the better of him. Sometimes wonder where his first loyalties lie, Ulster or Billy. He's been away negotiating grand alliances with dodgy continental businessmen. He claimed he's got a contact who can provide us with weapons or lots of cash." "That's interesting, Ken. Why are you involved with Billy if you dislike him so much?" Robinson was taken aback by Johnston's sideways question. "I thought the RUC would have filled you in on that one." Struth was impassive. Johnston stared straight ahead. "I am a founder member of the UPP. Billy is a Johnny-come-lately sprung to leadership by a few hotheads. I did it for Ulster. I set it up for my father, and his father, and for all the settlers who gave their lives establishing Ulster as a Protestant, Papist-free zone. What did you get out of it, Ken? Why did you take the king's shilling from the security forces?" Robinson's eyes blazed up. "I've never made a penny and never asked for a penny. I did it for Ulster, and now I'm doing this for Ulster because those hotheads and people like them will destroy it all. In any case, what the forces of law and order want here is not a million miles from what I want. Anyway, what was the deal Billy struck? Guns or money to assassinate 3 men? Who were the men?" "I don't know. Billy adjourned the meeting before I could see a name, but one of them was a chemistry student or something like that." Johnston's brain kicked into overdrive. "Could it be Wrightson? He was director of a small pharmaceutical research company based in Edinburgh." "What about the other 2? "Don't know." "Did he kill them?" "Don't know." "When and where does he get the guns and money?" "Don't know, but it will be on giving evidence." "Who was going to do the hit?" "Don't know. I'm out of the loop now. Billy wants me of the council and I haven't been at a meeting since." "Can you find out? Can you speak to those who are attending?" "No. I am out of the loop. If I got that information and he found out, I would be a dead man walking." "Who else is in his inner circle?" "No more questions. That's all I can give you. This is supposed to be a toilet break. I'm operating the crane at Dock 3 in the shipyard. Don't want to get my jotters." Robinson got up. Johnston stood up. Struth moved towards the door and opened it. He was agreeing with Ken Robinson. Johnston was silent in the car on the journey back. Only when they reached the station did his thoughts become words. "Bill, how reliable is he? Look, he didn't win any prizes at Sunday school, but I think you've got an honest account." It was 2 p.m. when Johnston arrived back in Glasgow. The grey shroud which always enveloped the city seemed darker and more ominous than normal. The obligatory rain lashed down as he made a beeline for the old Volvo. He was just about to start the engine when he noticed an incoming text message from Bill Smith. "Got the provisional forensics report on the severed hand, Jock." "Be round straight away," Johnston replied. The rain had eased by late afternoon when Johnston sauntered nonchalantly into the forensics lab. A bespectacled Bill Smith glanced up from the microscope and smiled at the bruising figure of Jock Johnston. "Let's go into my office and we can go over things." Johnston followed the rakishly thin, graying figure of the senior Sakos into his small side office. "What have you got for me, Bill?" "It's all in there." Smith slapped the 50-page forensics report onto the desk in front of Johnston. Slowly, he fingered the initial pages and began to read the summary. "I'll save you a bit of reading time, Jock. This case is a tough nut to crack, in every sense. The DNA sample from the hand caused us a few problems." "Why?" "Well, it had been away from the body for quite some time. Detached for at least 10 days. Johnston's eyebrows arched in surprise. "What you are saying is that there may have been no incinerated body?" "Well, we were not sure due to decay how good the sample was, but nevertheless we did eventually get a match. And it belonged to a Raymond Lynch. He was on the RUC Belfast database." "Great, that's a start. No need. The full background is in the report. Vagrant, aged 36, from Armagh area. Was he Roman Catholic?" "Why do you ask that? I'm not sure. Check the report." "It has a bearing on the case. Yes, he was. Catholic vagrant strays into the wrong area of Belfast." Smith looked a bit shocked at the fact that a man's religion might lead to his untimely demise. In this day and age, in a modern democracy. Well, who knows? It might have happened to a Protestant vagrant. Was the match 100%? 99%? Corroborated with fingerprints? If you read the report later, there is detail of a string of convictions for minor offenses in his 20s. Anything else show up? Well, there were tiny fibers on the wooden window pane which showed up under laser light back at the lab. We put the fibers under the electron microscope and they appear to be jute. The fibers also showed traces of a resinous oily substance which so far we cannot nail. Could be cannabis oil. Maybe, but why would you store oil in a cloth sack? Maybe it was wrapped in something and there was a leakage. We'll see. I'm waiting for a definitive from London on it." "Talking about London. Is there any word about the death in the Camden pub?" "I've got a provisional lab report from New Scotland Yard. I was asked to make sure you got it." Johnston grimaced as he leafed through the first couple of pages. "These findings are provisional, Jock. I believe they had at first suspected cause of death was asphyxiation. Leaning over a toilet bowl, he maybe just choked on his own vomit, but the autopsy showed internal organ damage. There was a .22 lodged in his cerebellum. How did it get there? Via the anus. Someone fired a low-velocity weapon which was cushioned by a lot of soft tissue. That gives a whole new meaning to shooting up." "Indeed. The other interesting thing in the provisional is that they were doing a laser search for prints and fibers when they came upon some stains. Semen stains at the front, and the back. Interesting. Maybe he shot both ways?" "Nope. After they ran the phosphate test, they DNA sampled both stains and they are from a different person. One is from the victim and the other is now on file awaiting a match. Let's think this thing through. He goes to the toilet for consensual sex, or someone follows him and then rapes him. They then fire a short-range ballistic projectile up his posterior for good measure. But why the semen stains on the front? Well, two possible reasons. The stain on the front could predate the incident. Or, during the sexual activity he went erect as a reflex action and ejaculated. I'm going to get on to Belfast, ask them to speed up procedures. We need a fast match to Billy McKay." Ken Robinson trudged into the King William. He made his way to the back saloon where a few of the faithful sat at a beer-stained table underneath the garish portrait of the gay Prince of Orange. The Queen stared imperiously down on them from the opposite wall. She looked severe, but this didn't temper the rougher language of the assembled crew. Ken ordered a heavy beer over the truncated saloon counter. The brutish barman sliced the head with a knife and silently handed the yeasty beverage to eager Robinson. He sat down. "What goes?" "What goes?" the thin leery-faced loyalist asked Robinson. "It's that bastard Mackay again. He's getting too big for his boots. He's been flying all around Europe at our expense, arranging this and that fantasy deal. Now apparently we've got top Swiss industrialists plying us with arms. He should take a run. SSHHHHH, walls have ears." Robinson checked himself. Smithy was right. Pete Sheldon had said nothing, then changed the tone. "Are you going through for the HIBS game? Better saving a bit of cash for the real Fenians. We've got Celtic at Ibrox on the 28th. Robinson nodded. "He's right. It's a better weekend. Plus we can do a bit of business." Robinson winked as he said it. The lounge was very quiet and only a couple of strangely silent drunks stared ahead at the red, white and blue wallpaper emblazoned with the Glasgow Rangers club badge. Two tall thin men walked quickly through the lounge and into the small bar where Robinson and his cronies were sitting. They were masked and said nothing when they pulled out their revolvers. Terror was etched on the faces of the trio. The barman stood motionless. "You outside," the taller gunman ordered, motioning with the gun towards Robinson. The shorter gunman covered the bar and lounge. "Nobody moves?" When Robinson was outside, he was met by 5 masked men. Nothing was said. He slumped to the ground under a hail of blows. It seemed to last for eternity, but it was only 5 minutes. He felt the final blow when the baseball bat came down, shattering a kneecap into shards of broken bone. The lone gunman left the pub, pointing back as he left. The masked men disappeared into the dark Belfast night. The sound of sirens caused a few curtains to twitch off the Shankill Road. And the ambulance crew were mercifully unmolested as they quickly bundled the unconscious Robinson doll-like into the back of the vehicle. He was still unconscious when wheeled into A&E. As far as punishment beatings go, this was a professional job. Dead to the world but still breathing. It was 3 days before Robinson was fully conscious and able to wheel the wheelchair down the corridor to watch the last half hour of the Rangers v HIBS game. When he was helped back into his side room after the game, a card had miraculously appeared at his bedside. "Get well soon, signed Billy. D.I." Johnston knocked gingerly on number 42 Bridge Street, Arbroath. The small garden of the adapted bungalow was neat and tidy. He could hear a rolling noise and the click of a snub being opened. Jock stood to his full 6 feet tall and looked down on the wheelchair-bound figure of his cousin Jamie. His only surviving relative looked huddled and broken, gripping the chair for support. When he saw Johnston, his face broke into an easy smile. "John," he rasped. Johnston knelt and embraced his cousin. "How are things?" was the only remark he could think of. "Not too bad, John. Come on in and sit down. Snooker's on the telly." Johnston let Jamie roll his wheelchair into the living room. "You shouldn't have bothered, John the First. Know you're a busy man." "Never too busy for family. I got the chance to come up on a posting and it seemed to make sense." Ronnie O'Sullivan was lining up along black to win the frame. Jamie was clutching his betting slip. "You got the savings running on this?" "No. Just a bit of an interest." "How is the health?" "Well, they've given me a year at most." "I'm wasting away, John." "Sometimes I." "You're a brave man, Jamie. You were always an inspiration to all of us." Johnston could feel himself choking back a salty tear. "You fancy a cuppa?" Jamie queried to change the drift of things. "Strong coffee?" "Janice." "2 coffees, please." Janice McCabe peered round the kitchen door. Her red hair was tossed back loose over her uniform. "I'm your care worker, not your butler." "Milk and sugar." She spotted Johnston's bulky frame obscuring the whole armchair. "Are you not introducing me?" "Janice, this is my cousin John Johnston. John, this is Janice McCabe, a longtime friend and now my professional care worker." Johnston nodded across and could not help being captivated by her vivacious good looks. A sort of Scarlett O'Hara with flaming red hair instead of black. "Spot of milk and 2 sugars, love." Same for me, Jamie rasped whilst glancing at the TV. Jamie's spirits were lifting moment by moment. A close relative with a close friend and possibly a remunerative investment in a snooker result all served to help lift the gloom of his mundane existence. After about another hour of pleasant chat, Jamie excused himself as he was feeling tired. He said goodbye to his cousin at the bottom of the stairs before he activated his stair lift to his bedroom. Janice and Johnston left together. "Do you know if there's anything else I can do to help Jamie?" Johnston inquired as Janice slipped into the driver's seat of her Ford Fusion. "Come round sometime and I'll tell you all I know about his condition." She handed him her council services contact card with a smile. There was a mobile number at the bottom. Johnston nodded. The drive back to his temporary accommodation in Brodie Ferry gave Johnston time to contemplate. What more could he do to help his cousin? A choking guilt that he was not doing enough soured his mood. He sat alone in his flat eating the fish and chips from its wrappings, and his mind drifted back to Jamie, then back to Janice, and then back to Janice again and again and again. The third glass of Talisker finally forced him to switch off the telly and stumble in the cold single bed. Wolfgang Schmidt parked the dark blue BMW in the car park of Klug Trading Group, the largest general import-export business in Switzerland. A fully owned subsidiary of AstraZeneca, the Swiss pharmaceutical giant, it had traded independently from 1929 until 1957, when Schmidt's grandfather had sold out to the AstraZeneca Group. Even during the Second World War it had managed to continue trading, selling everything to everyone on all sides. Schmidt was the managing director of Klug and its major shareholder. He also owned a 5% stake in AstraZeneca, a legacy of the original transaction transferring the trading group ownership to the drug giants. Schmidt wandered through the massive warehouse next to the car park until he came to the 5-floored concrete office block. His office on the top floor was immaculately ordered. Not for Schmidt the odd loose paper clip. This was order at a level that said maximum efficiency. He had barely sat down when the phone rang. "And Mr. Bokov to see you." "Send him up." Dmitry Bokov was a tall, slender-framed Bulgarian whose nose squinted at an angle which suggested he had been slow-moving it on at least one occasion. "Nice to see you, again. And you? How was your journey?" "Pleasant." "Good. Coffee?" "Yes. Isolde, coffee please for our visitor." Bokov made himself comfortable by sinking into the leather sofa by the window, and Schmidt sat across from him in the swivel chair. "What are you offering?" "I need a job done," Schmidt said, handing him an A4-sized envelope. Bokov was opening the envelope when Isolde appeared with the silver tray. Bokov waited till she had gone before taking out the contents of the envelope. Schmidt poured 2 strong Robusta coffees and melted the sugar fully before adding the cream. Bokov placed the photograph of Billy McKay on the table and stared long and hard at it before turning the photo over. The back contained a full CV which included movements, residences, and even hobbies. At the end of the CV in capitals was "delete." "What are the terms?" "Confirm the kill and you take £300,000 or 150 Imbal NATO assault rifles." "What are the rifles, Overstock?" "Never you mind that. Take it or leave it. I know you have friends who would like rifles. Make it the rifles. How do you deliver them?" "In containers, C.I.F. paid to any port you want. Marked as televisions." "Dubrovnik?" "Yes." Bokov got up and with some warmth shook the hand of the ice-cold Schmidt. The taxi ride back to the hotel was reassuringly clockwork. Dmitry Bokov was working again. Cambridge was the sort of sedate citadel of Imperial England that Johnston had vaguely considered as a future retirement residence. Short on crime and full of contemplative intellectuals, Johnston fancied it might be a good place to sink into old age and hopefully slip with the minimum of fuss into some other world. But as he approached the ivory towers today, he had that nagging doubt that any place at any time was going to give him genuine peace of mind. The entrance to All Souls was chillingly gothic, and Johnston felt humbled at the thought of all the great minds whose suitably enlarged craniums had ducked below the stone lintel on entry to the registrar's office. Got an appointment to see Professor Hendry at 3 p.m. The austere gentleman behind the desk scratched his protruding ear and flicked through the appointments book. Mr. Johnston, please sign here, and if you don't mind write your car registration and time in the visitor's book. Johnston scribbled his signature with all the clarity of a press-jurist GP and awaited further instruction. The registrar nodded over to a porter, and Johnston was on his way to meet Professor Hendry, head of chemistry at All Souls. The professor was securely ensconced in an armchair by the window in his garret office/restroom. Good afternoon, D.I. Johnston. Please make yourself comfortable. Johnston took the empty chair across from the professor and cleared his throat. Thank you for agreeing to see me. That's perfectly okay. What information can I help you with? You had a student here about 5 years ago, Paul Wrightson. What can you tell me about him? Brilliant student. Absolutely brilliant student. Could have been anything he wanted in my field. Could have been. Yes. I don't know what he is doing now, but I strongly urged him to do a PhD. I felt he was ready to make great contributions in the field of chemistry research. But, well, he didn't do it. Something, whatever it was, distracted him. Women, money, some problem. Not that I was aware of. My guess is he had doubts. Doubts. Yes. He was a serious-minded young man, and I think maybe he got doubts about the usefulness of chemistry and science in general in improving the human condition. Was he political? Not overtly, but as I said, he did have these concerns about the human condition and the state of society. Maybe he wanted a new science. One unfettered by vested interests, free of reliance on commercial interests. I am not sure, but I put these things down to immaturity and the idealism of youth. Did he have a girlfriend when he was here? Not that I knew about. What about hobbies? There was one group he was involved with, I think it was called the Arcane Society. Strange name. Well, it is a very old group going back to the earliest days of the university. Some say it was formed by teachers and students who had been versed in the knowledge of alchemy. As you will be aware, alchemy was the forerunner of chemistry, and I dare say in the 1400s this knowledge was cutting edge. Very interesting. Is it still active? Yes. You can get contact details if you ask at the front desk for the student almanac. Okay. Professor. Were there any other students in his chemistry class who you knew he was close friends? There were 2 chaps he used to socialize with a lot. James Strickland and Albert Moyer. One of them I believe may have been in the Arcane Society with him. I tell you what, I will look out the records I have for them and fax the details through. That's very kind of you. Oh, now that I think about Bob Richards, a current member of the chemistry staff, was a member of the Arcane Society at the same time as Paul Wrightson. You could make an appointment to see him as well. I'll do that. Thanks for your help. Use this if any more information comes to mind. Johnston handed him a contact card. M. Police Scotland. What is it that brings you down so far south? Is Paul in trouble of some sort? We do not know. Technically he is a missing person, but that may just be because we cannot locate him. Oh dear. I wish you the best of luck with your inquiries. As I said, he was brilliant. Okay. I know your time is precious, so I will head off just now. Thank you, Inspector. Johnston descended from the hallowed heights of academia and landed terra firma back at the registrar office. He picked up a copy of the student almanac. The chief registrar was busy filing some applications when Johnston rapped gently on the wooden counter. Can I speak to Bob Richards? Billy McKay recoiled backwards. He felt the sharp searing pain in the middle of his chest. Lying on his back, he was looking directly up at the azure blue sky. He could still vaguely hear the sound of drums and flutes, but they were getting distant. Around his wounded body 1 or 2 braver marchers seemed to be staunching the flow of blood from his chest, but most of the flute band had disappeared into alleyways or cowering behind cars. Billy looked straight ahead up into the sky, and through the dreamy white clouds he could see a white steed. Mounted on the white charger was the king. William flicked back the curly locks under his black bonnet. He stooped on the horse and offered a huge ghostly hand out. Billy clutched into the air and gripped the red hand. The king let go and then dropped his robe to display his naked body to the wounded and dying loyalist leader. Billy stared ahead past the king. He could hear some ancient flute sounds, and approaching him was a man in green. Billy shrunk back. He recognized the face from old Republican literature. It was Wolfe Tone. The Irish rebel came closer and offered his hand to Billy. He grasped it and it felt like a familiar grip. Wolfe Tone looked him in the eyes. "You've done good, Billy boy." Then he disappeared in the same ghostly mist which had enshrouded the king. The sky was darkening now and Billy was getting sucked into the vortex. He looked and there was no body, just the enveloping darkness before judgment. The crowd was beginning to gather its collective senses. "It's some Fenian sniper, they got Billy. Let's take the fight to them." "Yes. Get a Facebook message out. We congregate in the center at the king's head." "Okay. Then what?" "We'll set Belfast ablaze." Dmitry Bokov dismantled the Imbal assault rifle and quickly placed the parts in his old green rucksack. The metal stairwell at the back of the building led down onto a backstreet alley. It took him 3 minutes in total to join the howling crowd jostling its way down Carson Road. He peeled off into Belfast train station and ordered an Americano in the busy cafe. The train from Belfast to Dublin took 2 hours. Dmitry looked out of the window at the emerald green fields. He just had time to catch a bite to eat in Dublin Airport Departure Lounge. Root was buzzing with the scenes from Belfast. The news anchorman droned on endlessly about the possible implications for peace on the island. Unnamed Irish Republican sources were completely denying any involvement in the brutal slaying of Billy Mackay. But nobody believed that. The European Union was suspending Brexit negotiations whilst British troops made ready to cross the water and restore order to the rioting cities of the north. Dmitry couldn't care less. The Macedonian freedom fighter was interested only in the endless independence struggles of the Balkans. Bob Richards was sitting in his usual place under the stained glass window depicting Charles XI. The Cavaliers and Horses was one of the oldest pubs in Cambridge and a favourite with staff and students. Johnston glanced around and saw the Telltale magazine and pipe. Jock Johnston. Lancashire Police working temporarily for Police Scotland. Bob Richards, Senior Lecturer in Chemistry, pleased to meet you. I won't take a lot of your time, but I need some information about Paul Wrightson. I believe you were both members of the Arcane Society. Johnston was temporarily distracted by the tall blonde waitress who approached their table. Anything to drink, gentlemen? Americano, please. And a blueberry muffin. She looked at Johnston. Can I have a double Talisker? What's that? It's a blended Scotch whiskey. Don't think we've got that one. Johnston admired her slender youthful beauty and ruminated for a few seconds. A double anything with Scotch and whiskey on the label. She scribbled dutifully and then misted gracefully back to the wooden gantry to fetch the drinks. Yes. He was president and in his final year. I was a first year. What was the purpose of the society? 3 objects. The investigation of the works of the medieval European alchemists. The practical application of that knowledge. And the creation of a network of like-minded people. Very interesting. And did you ever apply any of this knowledge? Well, we were in a unique position to investigate, as the university library has a massive collection of alchemical materials including handwritten emblem books. What are these emblem books? Encoded knowledge contained within symbolic drawings which were used by the early alchemists to protect their knowledge from the profane. And also allude to higher chemical secrets difficult to grasp by the intellect alone. Johnston was highly impressed by the aims and methods as described, but he needed to know a little more about the players. Do you know what happened to Wrightson? Or for that matter James Strickland and Albert Moyer? They were all in the society. They were very close friends. When they qualified they set up a company called Alk, something. I think it was Alcatel Limited. Johnston's eyes lit up. Is it still trading? I don't know. Did any of the trio dabble in illicit drugs? Not as far as I am aware, but Strickland was known to have a penchant for fine wines, usually by the bottle. Did they have the ability to produce illicit drugs or even so-called legal highs at that time? Look, Inspector, I don't know where this is leading, but as far as I am aware the three of them were law-abiding, clean-living citizens. Bob Richards sipped his coffee and looked across accusingly at Johnston, who took a long sip on his double. Sorry to ask. There has been an unfortunate incident in a Scottish glen and we are pursuing all angles. It looks as if there may have been a fatality, and that fatality might be Paul Wrightson. Okay. Thanks for telling me that. I've got a class in 5 minutes, so I must dash. Richards sighed. Here's my card. Phone if you have any more background on Wrightson. Bob Richards hurriedly pulled on his trench coat and headed for the Dreaming Spires. Johnston fished out the old Doro 618. Jim. It's Jock. How are things? Not bad, Jock. We've nailed that serial flasher. He was completely exposed this time. A wandering panda caught him with full headlamps. Good. Do me a big favor. Save me time going through Police Scotland internals. Check company's house for Alcatel Ltd. Full details. Just email it or fax it? Okay, Jock. How's the fishing going? Not had time. I'll give you a private update at the weekend. See you. Johnston rang off, then stared at his empty whiskey glass. The ancient dilemma facing drinkers the world over: just one more for the road. Not this time. Next day Pete Ramsey was at his desk in his small office in Tayside Division HQ, Bell Street, Dundee, when Johnston sauntered in. He eased himself into the swivel chair beside the window and took out his notebook. Productive trip, Peter. Good. Case solved. Not that good. I met the head of department and a lecturer who had been in a chemistry society with Wrightson. Apparently, there were 3 members including Wrightson who started a small company when they finished their degrees. The 3 degrees. Johnston ignored that one. Anyway, Parker down in Whittle emailed me last night. This company was registered as a chemistry research company. The 3 were directors. It had a small amount of initial capital and had a registered office in Cambridge before moving the HQ to Edinburgh. The interesting thing is that about a year ago there was a massive injection of capital into the business through a private loan. How much? Ramsey inquired with a growing interest. About £5 million. A big injection for a research company who had never brought anything to market. Yes. This begs the question, who lent the money and what are they getting out of it? If it was Wrightson up at the cottage, whoever lent the money might have killed him. Maybe they working on an illicit drug and their funders weren't happy with the result. Or maybe somebody else in the drug trade didn't fancy the competition. It's all guesswork just now, but I've arranged for a couple of Edinburgh undercover specialists to suss them out at their HQ in Liberton. I reckon we should take it nice and easy. Don't want to panic them into anything. McKay's funeral was a sullen affair. There were Union Jacks everywhere. McKay's coffin was covered in the red, white, and blue just as he would have wanted. The crowd was in a belligerent mood, but the call for calm from various Protestant dignitaries including paramilitary leaders was largely heeded. As the procession made its way south to the Belfast crematorium, the crowds were packed tightly on the pavements. Ken Robinson from his temporary wheelchair was able to catch a glimpse of his erstwhile enemy's last journey. He was tempted to launch a ball of mucus as close to the coffin as he could get it, but it wasn't worth risking a lynching for the sake of the ego-driven nutcase. The RUC were visible everywhere alongside the funeral cortege. They mingled with the mourners whilst keeping an eye out for any sign of flamboyant gestures likely to inflame the delicate mood of the crowd. M.I.5 were altogether more invisible but present nonetheless in numbers. This was a great opportunity to name-check key figures. The delicate politics of the province might also be gauged from who turned up and where they stood. The coffin was carried gracefully through the rusted wrought iron gates. The 6 muscle-bound pallbearers ghosted Mackay's corpse through the flower beds and past the name plates into the church-shaped crematorium building. Inside it was packed. The Very Reverend James Dalmahoy motioned for the congregation to stand as Billy's last remains moved smoothly towards its place of incineration. The first hymn was "Come All You Faithful," thought fitting for Billy's loyal tendencies. Ironically, it was an old Jacobite hymn written as a code to be sung for the uprising of 1715 to restore the Stuart monarchy. After they were recited, the minister continued, "We are gathered here today to remember William Mackay. As a father, husband, and plumber by profession, he was widely respected by one and all." Many of the congregation had great difficulty in recognizing anything of Billy in the glowing eulogy preached by the Reverend Dalmahoy. As the coffin began to make its descent downwards, a small cracking sound rang out. Then a bigger bang sounded as the building began to fill with thick black smoke. Billy was not going to burn today, at least not in the bowels of the building. A mass panic ensued as the final explosion sent splinters of masonry sharding into the pews and pulpit. At least one mourner clutched a blood wound around the chest. The stampede picked up pace and the elderly Presbyterian in the front was trampled underfoot by the unholy dash for salvation. Outside, the crowd took some moments to digest what was happening. Pandemonium broke out in RUC headquarters. "What the fuck's goin' on, Ronnie? Who knows, boss? Either IRA or more likely some of Billy's enemies in the PDF must have planted a real fizzer down beneath the incinerator. I'll get all available down there. You make sure fire brigade and ambulances are on red alert." Johnston rang the bell at flat 25, Menifeeth Road. Janice answered the door, still wearing her white nylon carrier's uniform. Her long red hair flowed freely, and in the half-light of the stairwell she looked like some Celtic goddess from a long-lost pantheon. She motioned for Johnston to come in, and like a sheepish schoolboy he warily crossed the threshold. Hair flat was immaculately tidy, and the wooden bookcase heaved with the weight of hefty tomes dedicated mostly to nursing and the philosophy of nursing. "Give me your coat," she said, gently touching his shoulder. Johnston felt the weight of police worries dissolve a little when he disrobed from the heavy mackintosh. "Nice flat you've got. It's a good area. Quiet. Take a seat on the sofa, Jock, and tell me a bit about yourself." Janice sat beside him on the safe, keeping a discreet arm's length distance. Johnston leaned back and sunk further into the comforting leather. "Not very exciting. Middle-aged cop. Widowed for 10 years and now married to the job. Any likes? Whiskey, golf and fishing. Typical Scotsman. A Scotsman that's been away a while. Jamie's dad was my uncle. My parents were killed in a car crash when I was 9 years old. Luckily got fostered to a nice police family in Lancashire. Tried to keep in touch over the years, but sometimes it's difficult." "Is that why you're up just now, see Jamie?" "Yes. Knew he wasn't keeping well and got the chance to come up with the job." Janice smiled, her small girlish freckles spread around the lips. "I'll fix a couple of drinks. What's your poison?" "Whiskey, straight, whatever you've got." "Bell's." "Bell's is fine. Made near Pitlochry, I think." "Well, I'll take your word for it." Janice poured an oversized double for Johnston and a gin and tonic for herself. She settled down again next to Johnston, and this time a little bit closer. "Jamie's dying, you know." "Yes. I gathered that. I knew Jamie before I became his carer. Knew him from childhood. In fact, I went out with him for a couple of years." Johnston felt a bit uncomfortable with this, but let her continue. "Anyway, we never got engaged or anything, and I met a footballer. I was still young, maybe 22 to 23, and you know how it is, the glamour of it all. Did you leave Jamie for him? No. Not really. It was a few months after we split up. Johnston began to relax as the bells began to tickle his stomach and dull the neuroreceptors in his overworked brain. Janice got a bit closer on the sofa. With the large gin and tonic in one, she used the free hand to gently place her long elegant fingers on Johnston's collar. He could smell her scent. A French perfume with a strange erotic power. Johnston was trapped between excitement, fear, and the urge of nature. For a grizzled 44-year-old cop, the desire to release and let love take its course began to overpower him. He was tantalizingly caught between the need to be an always-in-control police officer and the desire to be like a child again, surrendering into the warm embrace of trust, warmth, and sensuality. He gently placed a hand near her right breast and felt her bosom heave a little with the tactile surprise. Janice swung her arms around his barrel chest and Johnston let his tongue slip through her rouge-pouting lips. She unworked the buttons on her blouse to save Johnston from a memory overload, and she placed the bubbling gin on the coffee table so she could work faster. Johnston's recall began eventually to kick in, and he felt a surge of blood in his lower body circulating to long-forgotten vessels in his dormant extremities. He heard the pounding of his own heart like the hooves of racing thoroughbreds as Janice undid some of his clothing. The doorbell rang. The blood pressure eased like the steam of a switched-off kettle. Nature's course had been interrupted in the most brutal of fashions. Janice got up and the paperboy got some real news when Janice opened the door, still half ruffled. When she came back, Johnston was readjusting physically and mentally. But Janice wanted the moment. She poured another couple of stiff ones and switched on classic FM. They were soon coiled together again like writhing pythons. Janice led Johnston through to the metal-based double in the back bedroom. Johnston was faintly aware of his own middle-aged out-of-shape form and the more shapely gym-honed figure of his red-haired lover. He felt all the emotions as they combined between the sheets until his strength was sapped. He had royally discharged his duty and felt the weight of an enormous emotional boulder lift from his back. Janice lay back satisfied and stared at the peeling plaster on the whitewashed roof. Johnston's mobile went off. "Excuse me, Janice." She watched with tenderness as he slid like a beached whale raflot onto the bedside seat. Panting a bit, he rasped, "Johnston. It's Jim. Jim Parker. Have you knocked it off yet?" "You could say that," Johnston replied. "Well, don't want to keep you up all night, but just to say we have had a report from the RUC. That bloke McKay, who you suspect might have been involved in the exploding cottage. Well, they reckon he wasn't shot by the IRA. Why? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Firstly, wrong type of bullet, they don't use NATO assault rifles. Secondly, RUC have a secret line of communication and there was a flat denial. If this had been officially sanctioned anywhere within the Republican movement, they would have confirmed. And politically it was not in their interests to set Belfast ablaze, at least not at this point in time. Have they got any idea who could have been behind it? They are following all leads and they are in close contact with the Garda in the Republic. Special Branch and M.I.5 are involved, but we're unlikely to hear their conclusions. Okay. I'll chew this over and get back to you tomorrow. Okay, Jock. You have a good time up there and take it easy." The words danced round Johnston's ears as he looked over to see Janice stirring and provocatively pulling a sheet to reveal her long slender legs and just a hint of orange pubic hair glistening with the attention of the fading sunlight. She motioned him towards her and the old whale spouted steam as they entwined once more. Johnston picked up the faxed report at 2 p.m. Edinburgh's Special Surveillance Unit had it marked urgent. Nobody had entered or left the building in 3 days. They had, using the special warrant, effected an entry to the building. There was nothing there, not a beaker, not a telephone, not a desk chair. The only possible clues to who had occupied it were a series of unpaid bills and other varied correspondence. Only one had a name, James Strickland, and that was for a computer magazine subscription. "Jim. It's Jock. Do me another favor." "My God, Jock, we've got our hands full with the Wuddle Flasher. Where am I going to get time? Johnston picked up Parker's humorous tone and then continued. Computer Monthly. I want you to get onto them and find all known addresses for a subscriber called James Strickland. Tell them it's police business and they had best be snappy. Okay, Gaffer. By the way, we nailed that burglar from the Birchwood area. Weird bugger, he had a Wendy house in his front room. Looks like he sleeps in it. Johnston signed off and stuck his feet up on Ramsey's desk. He stared out of the window at the hayfields in the distance and his mind drifted to Janice. Could he make it with Janice? Could they be an item, together? A burned-out old cop and a nymphomaniac care worker. Johnston got up and went over to his briefcase. He fished out the cheese and ham sandwiches and a small package wrapped carefully in silk. He laid the sandwiches on one end of the desk and the tarot cards straight in front of him in the middle. He checked the corridors were empty before he shuffled the cards. This spread was going to be different. The central card was going to be the cottage. The left hand who blew it up and the right hand card was the result of the explosion. The central card was the magician. The magician indicated higher knowledge and the manipulation of subtle forces. The caduceus was a central emblem. Often medical people might be indicated by this card. To the left was the moon. It indicated the underworld, the subconscious, and the hidden. The last card was the Pope or Hierophant and he was reversed. Johnston knew this card pointed to initiation or the imparting of wisdom. He ruminated for a few minutes and then wrote the reading into his notebook. He carefully put the pack back into his briefcase. He closed his eyes and let the images wash over his mind. He was seeking inspiration and connections. Medicine might be chemistry, manipulation, or transformation of matter. Maybe it was a drugs factory in the cottage. The explosion was caused by a concealed, underworld or perhaps terrorist attack. But why the Pope? Johnston was jolted from his occupational reverie by the birdie song. Yes. Jock. I've got 2 addresses. First one is Lyberton, Edinburgh. Okay. Already got that one. Second. Is Tullochard Cottage near Cape Wrath. Okay, thanks Jim. Speak later. Johnston hurriedly rang Ramsey. It was the answering machine. Pete. Got a lead on Strickland. He has an address in Cape Wrath. I'm going up there today. I'll phone if I need any backup. Want to strike while the iron's hot. Johnston picked up some overnight things from his digs and then put the foot down sharply. It was a long drive and he was going to need all available time. The A92 was fairly quiet. The sat-nav was going to be meaningless for at least the next couple of hours. It was saying head to Aberdeen and move west towards Inverness. From just outside Brechin it was going to be 2 hours at least to hit Inverness. He thought about sticking the blue light on top and tunning it all the way, but common sense prevailed. When you are driving for at least 6 hours, best to pace yourself, and besides it was all a matter of luck whether he was going to be up in the cottage. Johnston took a 20-minute time out in Ullapool. He sipped the strong black coffee and swallowed a Kit Kat whilst watching the mid-afternoon ferry set sail for Western Isles. Hello. Pete, it's Jock. Did you get my message? Yes. You want me to get up ASAP? No. It's better you cover things where you are. What I need to know is, can I get backup from anywhere this far north? I'll contact Inverness. All I need is standby. Don't want to cause a fuss and frighten him away. Just a couple of well-trained specials with firearms certificates for potential surveillance and or protection. Well, that'll give them a bit of excitement up there. They won't have seen anything like that since the 1745 Jacobite rebellion. Well, let's hope it's a better result this time. I'm up in Ullapool and expect to hit Cape Wrath about 2 hours time. Get them to give me a phone when they are on their way and I'll tighten arrangements at that point. Okay. Jock. Take care up there. Don't take any needless chances. See you. Johnston finished the Kit Kat and stared out over the Atlantic Ocean at the departing Caledonian MacBrain ferry before heading the Volvo out towards the road north. It was another hour before Inverness phoned. They had 2 officers heading north and they are basing themselves in the Cape Wrath Hotel. Apparently, their best marksman was less than chuffed as he was going to miss the Shinty Cup final next day. He was the captain. Johnston passed the Cape Wrath Hotel and checked the sat-nav. The cottage was about a mile from Durness and the famous Smoke Cave. The road was degenerating quickly from AB to AC-. Finally he hit a dirt track and in the distance he could just make out Tulloch Ard Cottage. There was no sign of life when he approached the front gate. He banged loudly on the door and turned the handle. Locked. Just as he was going round to the back of the cottage he saw a figure running for dear life towards the cliff edge at the back of the cottage. Stop, stop. The figure turned and seemed to hit something, maybe a rock, and he fell forward. Johnston sprinted with his white middle-aged belly dancing in front of him. Before the figure could get fully to his feet and continue his escape, Johnston forced his 14-stone frame down on top of him. Police. Police Scotland. The man lessened his struggle on hearing the words. Johnston kept his arm in a tight lock. D.I. Johnston, only want to talk to you. No panic. Johnston pulled out his ID and the man seemed visibly relieved. Let's go inside. The back door led straight into the kitchen. Johnston watched warily as the tall thin figure sat down in the wooden rocking chair. Shall I stick the kettle on? Or do you want something stronger? It's a bit early for me. Besides, I'm not much of a drinker, but help yourself, he said, pointing Johnston towards a kitchen cupboard. Famous grouse, MMMM. Not my favorite, but I'm grateful. James, it's James Strickland, isn't it? Yes. That's right. Just call me Jock, Jim. What is it you want to talk to me about, Jock? We are inquiring into the disappearance of a Paul Wrightson at the moment, and we know you are a business associate and longtime friend. Have you any idea why he has disappeared, or for that matter any reasons that anyone might want him to disappear? There was a long silence, only the crashing of the Atlantic waves outside broke the hush. James Strickland reached across for the whiskey bottle and poured 2 large trebles. Not certain. We've been working together for Alcatel Limited on various commercial projects. Yes. We gathered that, but the premises do not look like they have been used for months. No. Some of our research is top secret and there are too many potential prying eyes in Edinburgh. So you have used secret, rural locations to carry out research? Yes. Some of it? Including Ardbeg Cottage in Glenclova. Amongst others. We suspect Paul might have been blown up in that cottage, we're not sure. Johnston looked across at Strickland, checking for his reaction. There was none. Oh dear. Was it an accident? You tell me. I don't know. Some of our research is quite dangerous. Lots of combustible chemicals, things like hydrochloric acid and various hydrogen compounds. Not sure you've got the scale of this explosion. It blew a stone-walled cottage to bits and scattered debris over 100 yards. Would anyone want Paul Wrightson dead? There could be, they might want all of us dead. Johnston poured another double for himself and Strickland as the chemist's tongue seemed to be loosening under the lubrication from a famous grouse. Who? I don't fucking well know, but we got a few warning signs about a year ago. Veiled threats and a brick through the window. Did your research involve anything to do with your involvement with the Arcane Society? Strickland looked momentarily surprised. Let's just say, the 3 of us found some interesting pointers in the old documents. What exactly were you producing or researching? A new narcotic? Strickland got up suddenly. He walked over to the leaking single-glazed window and looked out over the swooping seagulls diving and gliding over the white foaming waves. Something very important. Do you know anything about the work of the old-time alchemists? Johnston shook his head. Well, they have been misunderstood. Modern skepticism says they were deluded quacks seeking to turn base metals into gold for financial gain. But nothing could be further from the truth. Johnston could see that Strickland was still looking a bit shaky despite the double whiskey. The dark brown eyes were emitting signals of fear. But some confidence was returning with the warming glow of the double. Strickland sat down again and leaned over towards Johnston. They weren't really seeking gold, at least not for its own end. They sought something more valuable. Strickland paused and drew a long breath before continuing. The so-called philosopher's stone was really the elixir of life. A universal medicine so powerful it could not only cure all illness but perfect the health of all individuals. Its regular usage would help humanity to evolve towards a state of grace where even the ordinary man and woman would possess God-like qualities. Johnston's face showed no trace of surprise, but inwardly he felt he knew where this was all leading. Was Al-Qaeda working on this elixir? Not exactly, at least not exactly to the recipe of the old alchemists. We were integrating some of their most profound ideas, which Paul was able to decipher from the emblem books in Cambridge Library archives. Have you heard of monatomic gold by any chance? No, Johnston stated. Well, it was an ancient preparation of gold which the Egyptians used in place of their so-called star fire. This preparation, without getting too technical, altered the quality of gold in such a way that it exists in two different states simultaneously, if you understand quantum mechanics. Strickland checked himself. He noted Johnston's glassy stare and he feared he had already said more than he had intended. Basically, what you are saying is you were developing a new super drug capable of healing most ailments. Yes. Strickland got up again. He was 6 foot tall and wiry with it. He went to a cupboard next to the cooker and took out a cardboard box. He laid it on the table next to Johnston, then eased his weary frame back into the chair. Johnston opened the box and took out the photographs. The first dozen or so were pictures of diseased animals and the second batch showed the animals restored to health and looking vibrant. The last 2 pictures showed a human leg with severe lesions and then its normal, least repaired condition. Johnston stared hard at this last picture. We had to keep moving the research labs and offices. The nature of this work was top secret and we deliberately kept things to the closed circle of 3. Obviously we made provision to protect the knowledge for future generations just in case. He stumbled as the reality of his predicament began to sink in. What about Albert Moyer? Albert's dead. He died about 3 weeks ago. He was found slumped over a toilet in a gay bar in London. What was the cause of death? Well, the police were not sure at first. The body looked completely normal on the outside other than the small bump at the top of the cranium. Further examination revealed the internal organs were in a hell of a mess. How could that be? There was a .45 bullet lodged in the cranium. He had the bullet fired up his back passage. There must have been 2 killers involved because someone would have had to hold him down. Strickland was beginning to look very emotional. Does the Met have any idea who his killers might be? No. The only clue was a small card with the picture of a hand. It was a red hand. The neurons in Johnston's brain began to fire rapidly as the obvious connections began to form. I understand the nature of your work was likely to attract some adverse attention. Do you have any idea who specifically might be interested in stopping your work? Not specifically. The big drug companies would not want a universal panacea, but who knows, there might be secondary agencies connected to medicine. Maybe NHS suppliers. Okay. It's been a long day for both of us. Johnston got up and filled the kettle. He watched the ferry to Stornoway sail towards the horizon and then made 2 strong coffees. You stay here in this cottage. There will be 2 armed protection officers parked at the top of the driveway. One will be watching the cottage and the other all roads leading in. There is nothing to be afraid of. You are under Police Scotland protection as of now. Thank you. Johnston shook Strickland's hand in a gesture of reassurance. At the top of the driveway he craned his neck into the open window of the police car. This is important. No one gets in or out of that cottage without my say-so. If Strickland tries to go walkabout, you will need to restrain him." The two stub-bled officers nodded in unison. Johnston drove off in the battered Volvo to the Cape Wrath Hotel. It was 8 p.m. now and he was knackered. Too tired to even attempt the local whiskey. It was 12 hours of solid sleep later before Johnston reversed the journey of 5 miles back to Tullochard Cottage. The two protection cops looked dazed but still awake. "When's the relief due?" Johnston inquired. "About 2 hours ago." "Okay, if they're not here in another, I'll borrow a weapon and let you head off, but we need to make sure some kind of protection is on its way." Johnston sighed. There was no sign of life at the cottage. The curtains were still drawn and nobody answered after minutes of banging. Johnston radioed to the two protection cops and they brought the unmarked police Land Rover down the track. "Can you manage it?" Johnston said, pointing to the door. The bigger of the two cops applied a burly shoulder to the thin wooden door. And eventually it gave way. It was like the Marie Celeste inside. Everything was undisturbed but no sign of Strickland. His car was still at the side of the cottage. He could not have used it in any case as the driveway was blocked by the police Land Rover. Holy shit. He's done a runner and most likely by foot. Where the fuck could he go? Johnston was perplexed. The last thing he needed right now was a massive north of Scotland manhunt. Cape Wrath Hotel was the only logical place he could have gone on foot. Johnston tried the back door of the cottage. It was unlocked. He wandered out and walked the 50 yards to the sheer cliff face and looked down. The rope ladder was swaying in the wind. It snaked all the way down to the sandy cove 200 yards below. Oh shit. He's gone out to sea. Must have been a motorboat moored down there. Or someone's picked him up from the cove. Pete Ramsey was in cubicle number 3 when the phone rang. It was one of those dilemmas faced by all public servants in these situations. How important was this call? Ramsey laid his copy of the Police Gazette on the floor and from his seated position in the lavatory reached inside his jacket pocket hanging on the hook. "Pete Ramsey," he said in an irritated manner. "It's Jock. Been a bit of a slip-up." "What's the problem?" "Strickland's done a runner, out to sea." "I thought there were 2 protection officers with him." "Yes, there were. Nobody's fault as such. I could maybe have thought it through a bit better. Anyway, he shot the bolt overnight over a cliff edge and we suspect he has taken a boat. To where we have no idea." "Okay. What do you want me to do?" "Well, if he stays in the UK his life is in danger and he knows that. If he leaves the UK our chances of tying this case up disappear. Can you arrange immediate checks on all airports in UK and Northern Ireland? We can arrest him in connection with the disappearance of Wrightson, at least for the purposes of our investigation." "Okay. Did you manage to get anything useful out of him?" "Yes. A lot. I'll be back down at HQ for about 4 p.m. Can we hook up?" "I'll be in my office for 4. It had been a dangerous crossing, even for an experienced sailor like Strickland. The Free Spirit was not large by powerboat standards and even although he had made the crossing dozens of times the weather and currents were never constant. He said goodbye to the Free Spirit for the last time and climbed ashore at Kinsale, County Mayo. It was a 2-hour journey to Dublin. "Hi Pete." "Hi Jock. I've alerted all UK airports to report arrival of a James Strickland. He cannot board anything on a passport under Strickland." "That's great, but it assumes he is leaving the country. What if he has a false passport?" "Well, we're snookered if he has a dummy one, but he might just be planning to lie low in the UK for a while." James Strickland strolled through departures at Dublin Airport clutching tightly the brown academic-style briefcase. No one batted an eyelid. The Boeing 747 ripped through the sky heading west towards Boston at 5 p.m. GMT. "Is there any chance he has a dual passport?" "Well, I think his ID report said his grandfather was from Kerry." Johnston picked up the phone and was transferred to Colm Murphy, his friend and high-ranking contact in the Garda. He's going to check Pete. We will know within the hour. Sure enough, Murphy confirmed their worst fears within half an hour. The bird had flown. This was one free bird that wasn't going to be caged. What do you think, Pete? Are the FBI going to be arse tracing an on-the-run British beatnik? I doubt it, but we have got to try. If we tied things into our speculations about the politics of Ulster, it might strike a national interest chord with them. Okay, let's make it a bit more tangible. We've got a bit of evidence that. You phone the Chief Super, Police Scotland, and I'll get hold of Special Branch. They'll have to contact the FBI cause they're not going to listen to anything lower level. Len Lasky kept a beady eye on the bedraggled traveler who emerged unshaved from Boston Airport that afternoon. He watched him from afar as he booked into the motel 2 blocks from the airport. Next morning, James Strickland seemed a bit more normal as he hailed a cab back to the airport. He boarded a flight at 12 noon to San Francisco. Lasky phoned in his report and let the FBI in Frisco know they were to keep a low-profile watch on this strange Englishman. Strickland had a black suitcase with him when he entered a Mosite Systems main office. He was shown to a windowless office at the back of the concrete monolith. A gray-suited man in the office pointed to a black suitcase on the desk and said nothing. Strickland swapped briefcases and said nothing. The gray-suited man motioned to leave and Strickland left hastily before entering an official Amorite Systems vehicle. It was a 3-hour drive to the airport and Strickland was sweating in the California sun. He looked out of the window as the Boeing 747 roared into a shivering sky and felt relief wash over him. Johnston and Ramsey were in the small office of Tayside Police HQ when the faxed report was handed over by the gruff desk sergeant. "Fucking hell. He's scarpered. Good and proper, as they used to say. Rio de Janeiro. Even the FBI can't keep tabs on him there," Ramsey mused. "My guess is that a Mosite were behind their research. That £5 million soft loan was from them. Who are they? Why do they want to fund a bizarre research project? Yes. And have they arranged safe passage for Strickland to continue the research in some bunker in Brazil? Filled with some renegade Nazis?" Johnston managed to joke. "Or, maybe not. They maybe just want him out of the way. This is now officially way over our heads. Let's pass the whole thing to Special Branch. There may or may not be a national interest at stake." Johnston was weary. He was weary with the responsibility of the job and with responsibility in general. But a policeman's life was nothing but responsibility. He parked the car in the only available space. He was just about to get out when something tugged at him to look up the road to number 25. He saw the front door gently swing open and a tall middle-aged gentleman in a business suit emerged. He turned and in the doorway he could just make out Janice's lithe form lean forward and then plant a delicate kiss on the cheek of the besuited gentleman. Johnston's stomach churned and he felt a strange tightening in his chest. Suddenly, he was back in a broth. It was 1969 and the football was on the television. It was the only television in the street and neighbors would enviously peek through the window as they made their way down the street. It was a Saturday and the 9-year-old John Johnston was looking out his football kit. He always stayed over at his grandmother's on a Friday night. The policeman who knocked on the door was austere and somber. He heard the words ringing still in his ears. The yellow Capri had collided head-on with a dumper truck. The occupants died instantly. The universe had collapsed in on him. The numbness enveloping him was not broken when his sobbing grandmother spoke through tears. Memories fade with time, but some events are so primordial in effect that a whole lifetime is not long enough to expunge them. Janice had just etched another line of pain that was going to take Johnston a long time to erase. Wolfgang Schmidt was in his office at 9 a.m. when Latrice Brandt handed him the typewritten report. The vivacious 30-year-old East German had worked for him for 2 years. Her long tousled red hair swept in whirls over her shoulders. He could smell a faint scent of peaches tingling his nostrils. He motioned her to sit down, then he opened the report. His face smiled a Teutonic grin of epic proportions. Mission accomplished. The bird has been cooked. Schmidt reached for the phone. Alex. Make the necessary arrangements for Mr. Bokhoff. He replaced the receiver and then glanced over at Latrice. He got up and turned the key in the office door. He brought down the shutters over the window. He pressed a hand on Latrice's delicate silken shoulder. She knew what was coming as he let his right hand slip to fondle her breast. She kissed him with all the fake enthusiasm she could muster as he gently pulled her towards him. The leather Chesterfield squeaked as he eased her into a submissive position over the back of the Chesterfield. As her skirt peeled off and she bent forwards, Schmidt felt his moment of triumph magnify, and he unleashed a torrent of ecstatic relief between the thighs of his reluctant servant. Schmidt regained his composure after some moments and ushered Latrice back to the reception desk where she could attend to her more mundane duties. The computer monitor was flickering when Johnston checked his Police Scotland security-protected email account. It had taken him a protracted struggle to learn how to switch the damned thing on and off, never mind picking up emails. But gradually he was getting comfortable with it. He still preferred fax for really urgent communication. There was always a warning when faxes came in, but emails depended on having the computer powered up and manual checking. The first couple of emails looked fairly routine, and the third one was an invite to the Police Scotland annual Cayley in Edinburgh. The fourth one had an unusual name and the subject line was enigmatic. paradise2@yahoo.br.co. Urgent, free radical. He clicked open the email. Hi Jock. Can't tell you where I am other than it is sunnier than bonny Scotland. Sorry I had to slip your protective custody. It wasn't I didn't trust you, but the enemies I'm dealing with have resources that stretch way beyond Police Scotland. It is unlikely that I will ever be able to contact you again, so I cannot stress highly enough the importance of the following information. As you are aware, I was a co-director of Alcatel Limited along with Moyer and Wrightson. As I explained in the cottage, we have been working on a nostrum elixir or wonder drug. The idea was to use the principles of monatomic gold creation to create a substance which would automatically repair DNA and bring a human being towards perfection. We were backed by U.S.A, one of the most powerful companies in the world. But we were opposed by dark forces mostly based in Europe who had a vested interest in maintaining human sickness. Most of our research work went up in flames when our cottage in Glen Esk was blown up. However, we did have some backup in another cottage in Glen Isla about 50 miles away. There is a leather notebook with encoded notes. There is only one person who can decode it, and that is Bob Richards at Cambridge. I am imploring you to collect that notebook and get it to Bob Richards. I believe your cousin is suffering with muscular dystrophy. For his sake, if not the world's, get the notebook. This Azoth, as the old alchemists called it, could be in production in months. But as you already know, the big drug companies don't want it. Bob Richards was the brains behind the operation. He will know how to decode and get the results back to an U.S.A subsidiary who will commence production. The cottage is called Ardbeg and it is near a ruined castle at the top of Glen Isla. There is a small safe in the cottage. The safe is in a concealed space in the loft. You will know it by a small mark that looks like a caduceus. Push the board on the caduceus and the compartment will open. The code is 569,043. Good luck. It is too risky for me to email you again, but I will know if you succeed. James Strickland. P.S. Please delete/destroy this email straight away. Johnston sat staring at the screen for a full 2 minutes. The implications were enormous, and not just for himself. He poured himself a large one and half concealed it under the pile of papers on his desk. He noted the details in his notebook and then deleted the email. He closed down the computer. Could he do what Strickland wanted? He was a police officer in the middle of a major inquiry. He would no longer be investigating the case, he would be part of the case. On the other hand, a criminal cabal was undermining a major development for humanity. Did he not have a higher duty than that of police officer? Johnston went into his briefcase and took out the silk-wrapped bundle he only ever used in emergencies or when his logical faculties met resistance from an illogical universe. The Marseille deck had been a gift from his late wife, who had been a lifelong psychic from a Romany family. The only woman who had ever truly touched his grief and relieved it. He thought of her as he spread the 3 cards out. The center was for the situation. The left was for causes and the right for solutions. This right-hand card would guide him on what to do next. The left-hand card was the Tower. It indicated hospitals, revolutions, and change. Johnston mused over this. The central card was the Hanged Man. Johnston paused. Revolution, explosion in hospitals and/or medicine gives rise to an uncertain situation. Perhaps it was a situation hanging the balance. The Hanged Man might also indicate a point of change. The third card was the Universe. In general terms, a good card. But it indicated clearly to Johnston that this case was bigger than him, bigger than Police Scotland. Bigger even than his political masters. He must act for the greatest possible good, and he considered again what Strickland had told him in the cottage. This was a universal medicine that would progress the whole human race. He knew now what he had to do. Bokov and his lieutenant Stanislav Orlov showed their clearance papers at the Dubrovnik Port Authority barrier. They parked the green Lada at the front car park. There were literally thousands upon thousands of metal freight containers arranged in hundreds of rows stretching from the car park to the dockside. Bokov opened the envelope and tucked the keys into his back pocket. The paper inside in bold type had the number 567 printed in large letters. Bokov nodded with his head towards Orlov and they started to search by row number. After 20 minutes they eventually found row 98, which started at 500 and ended at 650. The container they wanted was slightly bigger than most of the containers in that row. Bokov fumbled the main key into the lock, and when it loosened he motioned to Orlov to help him force up the metal pole, which slid into the holders on the side of the container as an added security measure. There was not much light inside the 50 feet by 50 feet container, but at the far end they could just see a stack of boxes partly covered by tarpaulin. In front of the tarpaulin was a NATO Imbal assault rifle gleaming in the half-light. Bokov picked it up and marveled at the comfortable feel it gave. He threw it over to Orlov, who cocked the trigger. Bokov pulled back the tarpaulin and saw about 25 wooden crates. They had no lids. These were empty crates. The fucky. Before the words were out, a loud clang reverberated around row 98 as the container door slammed shut. Bokov and Orlov heard the fateful sound of the metal pole banging into place. By the time they reached the container door they could hear the reinforced mortise click into lock position. Orlov gave some despairing bangs before slumping back into the half-light. Whoever had locked them in wasn't going to let passers-by into row 98. "Have you got the mobile, Stan?" Bokov asked gently. Orlov handed him the iPhone. Bokov calmly dialed his hotel in Dubrovnik. There was no signal. Either the metal was too thick or their captors had scrambled all signals. Some 20 minutes passed. Bokov approached the semi-slumped Orlov. "It's getting a bit stuffy in here, Stan." "Yes," he mumbled. Bokov pulled out the revolver. "I'm sorry, Stan. I'm going to need the oxygen if I'm in here for a while. The movement needs me. We cannot be selfish about these things." Orlov's eyes lit with a nascent fear. Then it subsided into resignation. Bokov squeezed the trigger, then covered his mouth to avoid the loss of any oxygen. He sat beside his dead comrade. He waited. The minutes became hours, and then outside he heard the sound of the crane. Then he felt himself being lifted heavenward. He swayed for a few minutes along with the metal box and then felt a terrible thud as the box's rapid descent was slowed. It started to get very cold inside the box. Dampness was beginning to seep in with trickles of water from the imperceptible cracks in the container. The drive to Ardbeg cottage at the top of Glen Isla was a lonely one. After he passed Alyth, the road was devoid of traffic except for one motorcyclist who had overtaken him dangerously on a bend. The purple heather was full and the glenside looked like an impressionist painting by Monet or one of the other French masters. After a 15-minute drive up the Glen Road, he spotted the picturesque cottage nestling on the hillside about a mile off the main road. He rumbled the old Volvo over the crumpled dirt track. He pulled her in just before the wooden farm gate which protected the last 100 yards of the journey. Johnston hesitated. The memory of an exploding cottage flickered through his mind. He took the binoculars from the glove compartment and got out. He scanned the 4 directions slowly. There was nothing. He heard a whirring noise from the distance and saw a mountain rescue helicopter heading in the direction of Ninewells Hospital, Dundee. He had one final scan for any rogue drones or concealed adversaries, then swung up the wooden gate. He decided to leave the car as the ruts in the track would knacker the suspension further, and besides, the less visual display on entry the better. Johnston walked around the cottage looking for any concealed traps. He peered in the windows on all sides looking for anything suspicious. Gently he eased open the unlocked wooden door and heard the awkward creak of a partly unhinged door. The front room was a tangled mess of domestic detritus. Kettles leaking onto the Chesterfield sofa with damp papers skewed in all directions. There was a smell of oil, and Johnston tiptoed gently past the broken glass, clutching the standard-issue Glock pistol. Nothing stirred. The kitchen was in a worse state than the front room. The bathroom was awash with water. He saw the ladder leading to the loft. The rungs creaked ominously as he ascended to the dust-filled room. Johnston was feeling dizzy. There was a sulphurous smell in the flat, and he heard a buzzing noise in his ears. He almost tripped on a rolled rug, and as he regained his balance he spotted the small caduceus on the wood-paneled wall. After a few minutes levering with a penknife, the compartment eased open and the Chubb lock safe glinted in the half-light. A thick leather pouch lay at the back. Johnston grabbed it and took the notebook out from the pouch. His eyes were met by a staggering continuous line of mathematical code. Rather than worsen his dizzy headache, he replaced it in its pouch and began to gingerly descend the loft stairs. The buzzing in his ears was getting worse. It changed direction like a drunken wasp, and Johnston suddenly realized the sound was coming from outside. He peered out of the window, wondering if some police helicopter had been tracking him. There was nothing in the sky other than a black hawk drifting over the trees. Johnston warily made his way outside of the cottage and breathed deeply the honeydewed air of the Highland Glen. Then the sound got louder again, and he saw the hawk flow towards him. He ran towards the car and watched as the hawk buzzed overhead, heading at an angle towards the cottage. Johnston hit the deck as the drone smashed full force into the side of the cottage, causing an explosion which blasted the roof clean of the top of the cottage. Johnston crawled the last 20 yards to the Volvo and pulled himself into the driver's seat. A piece of wooden splinter was causing a trickle of blood to run down onto his white Primark shirt. Quickly, he started the engine and crashed full throttle through the wooden gate. The road down suddenly looked like Death Alley to Johnston. The bastards that were after him could be anywhere. The roadside was going to be almost 6 miles of potential booby traps. Johnston did not know much about drones, but his guess was that whoever was controlling the drone was likely to be based near the castle in the opposite direction from the road down. That is, unless the drone was military-grade equipment which in theory could be directed from anywhere by satellite. If the idea had been to assassinate him, then doubtless someone was watching the road down. If there were accomplices, then they would radio ahead and he could be intercepted, perhaps at the main road which ran past the glen. On the other hand, he was a police officer and they knew he could radio for backup. As he hurtled the Volvo down at breakneck speed, he saw nothing but had that strange pervasive feeling of the paranoid schizoid, that he was being watched. When Johnston reached Ulleth, he pulled in at the car park near the burn. The milling throng of townsfolk gave him a bit of time. Time to think. He had to get the leather pouch with Strickland's notes down to Bob Richards in Cambridge, but if he was being watched, then either the notes would not get to Richards or the pressure on Richards would be intense and immediate. How many people were watching him and from where? If they could employ drones to attack, then they could be using satellites to track. Could he risk phoning Richards? Or would they have a phone intercept? He could not use a police-screened line because this was not strictly police business and the whole mess would get even more complicated. Johnston did not want to involve Parker, but the choices were getting limited. "Hi Parky, it's Jock." "Hi Jock. I'm in a difficult situation, Jim. Can't give you exact details just now. I will be in the usual spot tonight about 9 p.m. Can you meet me?" "Okay. Will an hour be enough?" "Yes. There is a bit of danger in all this, Jim, but I'm taking the biggest risk. I want you to know there is a red alert risk in this one. If you don't show, I'm not going to hold it against you. It's important business." There was a pause on the line and Johnston took time to scan the crowd in Olyth High Street. Nobody looked particularly suspicious. "I see you there, Jock." "Okay." Johnston felt a wave of relief as he steered the old Volvo through Olyth's narrow bends and out onto the main road to Perth. The traffic was light, and by the time he reached Glasgow that feeling of being watched was lessening. The tea time traffic was beginning to build as he steered round the circular weaving round Glasgow city centre. It was getting warm again and he rolled down the window. Junction 18 appeared and Johnston looked to slip into the lane for Glasgow Airport, which would lead eventually to the motorway south to Lancashire. From the corner of his eye he saw the white van begin to pick up speed. The sunglass driver smiled as he pitched the accelerator full whack to ram Johnston's rear. Johnston swerved dangerously in front of a small estate car and into the lane for Charing Cross. Above the wail of car horns tooting at him he could just hear the whiz of a .22 caliber missing by inches and smashing into the wall of the concrete tunnel. The ricochet mercifully missing the startled motorists in front. The white van could not slow enough to switch lanes and the vehicle careered away towards the bridge, and then a trip to Paisley beckoned. Johnston pulled in on Byres Road and wiped the seat beads from his brow. He was safe for now. Safe perhaps from detection if he could switch vehicles and get down to meet Parker. Glasgow City was particularly unforgiving of navigation errors. "Maybe I should be looking for them rather than them looking for me," he thought to himself. But there was a problem. He did not know how many of them were trailing him and how good their surveillance was. Better a live fox than a dead hound. The M8 was unusually quiet when Johnston set off at 7 p.m. for his rendezvous with Parker. It was tempting to stick the blue police light on the roof and rip down at 100, but the last thing he wanted right now was any attention. It was tempting to take a stop at Scotch Corner Services, but he sped on through the lashing rain. The downpour had ceased when he hit the turn-off for Preston and the late evening sun glinted as he got out at the Old Cock. He spotted Parker's red Ford Mondeo in the car park, and sure enough, when he pushed open the wooden lounge door, Parker's bald pate was shining lamp-like in the far corner. He looked up and Johnston nodded. "2 pints of Old Peculiar, love." "Just coming, cowboy." Johnston was a bit nonplussed by this slightly provocative greeting. She returned with 2 pints of foaming ale and proceeded to slice the heads of both with a silver cutlery knife. When he placed them on the table he spotted Parker's copy of the Racing Post. "I see you are still following the nags." "No. I think they are following me. And not very quickly either. Can't pick a winner for love nor money." "Well, I don't think I can help. The only tip I can give you is pack them in. Anyway, what is the problem, Jock?" "What are the problems?" "They are piling up." "In order. Number 1, someone is trying to kill me, or more precisely stop me doing something." "Doing what?" "Delivering a book to someone in Cambridge." "What is it, the Gutenberg Bible?" "Not quite, but just as desirable for the interested parties." "Sounds intriguing. What is it?" "For reasons of time, Jim, I cannot go into detail, but it's a handwritten set of notes which mean nothing to us but are understandable by a handful of people, including a Cambridge chemistry professor who I aim to deliver it to." "Is this police business?" "Yes and no, Jim. That's why I am offering you an out right now. The parties involved are connected to several murders, including the exploding cottage. I am taking this book because it will save lives. Many lives, but I cannot explain right now. Can you cover yourself and me, with the chief super, if this goes belly up and we are effectively disrupting a police investigation? All I am asking is that you meet me in Cambridge tomorrow morning and give me this." Johnston handed Parker the leather pouch containing Strickland's notebook. "If I am not there tomorrow, make sure this bloke and him only gets the notebook. And gets it personally." "What are you saying, Jock? These characters will try and take you out tonight." "I don't know, Parky, but it's safer if I don't have it until I get to Cambridge." The jukebox went on in the corner. Kashmir by Led Zeppelin pulsated through the wooden timber beams of the old cock, and both men looked over warily at the leather-clad biker gripping his lager. "Let's not get paranoid about this, Jim. If it's coming, it's coming, and no worrying is going to help." "Yes. But why don't you go to Special Branch for protection? Just trust me on this one, Jim. After we get the book passed over in Cambridge, I can continue the investigation and take protection. But at the moment it is best Special Branch and anyone else for that matter do not know about the book. I suggest you finish that pint and head back to Whittle. I'm dumping the car in Preston and getting a late train to Cambridge. I will, hopefully, see you in the Cambridge University Registry office at 10 a.m. tomorrow." "Okay." Parker slurped the last third of a pint down his throat and slowly got up from the table. "Good luck, Jock." "Same. And guard that book with all you've got." Johnston stared through the frosted glass window as Parker's Mondeo pulled out. He waited a few minutes before guiding the bold Volvo up the country road towards Preston. The late train was mercifully empty. John Huston watched as the news feed on Sky transmitted the latest news of the rioting in Belfast after the funeral of the loyalist paramilitary Billy Mackay. The old swan was quiet, with only a few old belchers gaggling away in the corner. He gripped his pint of lager tightly. This was a lunchtime treat he could have done without. Like a lot of activists on the fringes, he had ended up being caught in a net he had not cast. A member of the Orange Order since his late teens, he had moved to Brechin from Grangemouth when the garage business had come up for sale. Originally he had met Billy Mackay through a friend of a friend at an Orange Order function a few years back. Unfortunately, loyalty and friendship had got confused, and now he was in a pickle. He chewed slowly on the Pluffman's roll and felt his stomach grip tight with fear. The first thing he did back at the garage was put up the closed sign. He went into the office and pulled down the blinds. He boiled the kettle and made 2 coffees. In the basement, James Wrightson sat uncomfortably on the stiff wooden chair. His hands were bound and his legs were strapped to the legs of the chair. But there was no blindfold. Huston had taken the view that provided Mackay was coming back as he said he would, then Wrightson could be re-blindfolded and taken away. There was no reason he would know who Huston was or that he was in Brechin. He was not risking blinding a man for the cause, or at least not without a bit more detail of the why. He carefully placed the coffee on the small table next to Wrightson's chair. "There we go, son," Huston whispered, loosening the binding around Wrightson's arms. Wrightson reached out and sipped the strong Nescafe. He was alert, and reasonably alert for a man kidnapped and confined for a week. "We'll need to do some talking, son. I fear we are both in the broth, so to speak." "What about, exactly?" Huston looked at him with a forlorn furrow appearing on his brow. "Where to start? Let's put some cards on the table, what I know and what I don't know. You were brought here by a friend of a friend from somewhere, I don't know exactly where. Then this friend of a friend encounters an unfortunate accident and is unable to collect you. Why is that a problem?" Wrightson managed without betraying the stomach-churning tension enveloping him. "Have another sip of your coffee." Wrightson wondered if there was something in it, and Huston sensed this. "It's just coffee, son. If I had wanted to knock you off, I could have done days ago." Wrightson had a gulp of the sweet-tasting brew. "All I know is that I was in my holiday cottage up Glen Esk, and then next thing I am in this basement. There's got to be more to it than that. My friend would not have arranged your disappearance without some good reason. But, I am not really interested in why you were kidnapped or anything else for that matter. The way I am thinking is, while you are alive there is a witness to kidnap of which I am an accessory. If you're dead, it might be murder." Wrightson contained the fear. "Well, my problem is that there is someone who wanted me kidnapped and may be dead. I do not know who, and I presume you are not going to tell me." Therefore, I suggest we think of the best way for both of us to extricate ourselves from this situation. Houston's eyes lit up. He sipped his own coffee and offered Wrightson a chocolate cookie. Why don't I blindfold you? Drive you to the nearest city and leave you to go free. Then you forget all about me and I will forget all about you. There was no kidnap. Maybe. Let me think about it. Not too long. There was a silence whilst Wrightson considered the predicament. You could drive me somewhere. Kill me and then dump me. Or hand me over to a friend of a friend. Why would I do that? I could do it all here if that's what I wanted. Are you a religious man? Houston said, looking at Wrightson. No, not particularly. Well, I am. Houston went to the cabinet on the far side of the basement and brought out a small family Bible. I swear on the holy book that no harm will come to the gentleman here by my hand. He handed the Bible to Wrightson. What do you want me to say? That you swear the events that have taken place in the last week will never be recounted? Wrightson obliged with the awkward look of the atheist pretending to be religious. Houston nodded and went upstairs. The sun was trying its best and squeezed a little light onto Brechin High Street as Houston carefully eased the Ford Fusion through the narrow streets. The gentleman with dark sunglasses could see nothing through them as the two eye patches obscured all vision. Houston thought about Aberdeen but decided on Dundee. Camperdown Park was empty at 4 p.m. and he left Wrightson sitting on the steps of Camperdown House with £20 and a taxi number. Unfortunately, he could not leave him with his mobile as this would have been traceable. Back at Beltane Garage the for sale sign went up. Wrightson pulled himself upright and shaded his eyes from the glare of the sun. He walked to the bus stop and took a 22 in Dundee city centre. He boarded the megabus to Edinburgh. The Alcatel offices were deserted. He fumbled for the small key and opened the door at the rear of the building. As he suspected, someone had been in his office but they hadn't disturbed the wall safe, and carefully he entered the combination 77,789. The door swung open and he took out the £5,000 and his passport. He showered quickly in the staff bathroom. The train to Cambridge didn't leave until 8 p.m. He would need to find a travel lodge. It was 9 a.m. when Johnston and Parker went to the registry. I would like to see Professor Bob Richards. Sorry, he's in a meeting with a guest. Johnston glanced down at the visitor book. Mr. John Smith, Bentley 237 PQ5, whilst flashing his police badge. How long will he be? He said he'd be about an hour and that was 50 minutes ago. Johnston nodded to Parker. We'll just wait. As Johnston and Parker took their seats in the reception area, a faint thudding noise could be heard from outside. Johnston peered outside and at the far end of the quadrant he could just make out the slumped body of a bleeding Professor R. Oh, for fuck's sake. Call an ambulance. Emergency. The registrar looked stunned but reached for the phone. Parker rushed outside to give first aid. Johnston sprung as fast he could towards the winding stairwell and took 2 steps at a time as he progressed quickly up the 4 flights of stairs. His guts were heaving when he reached the top corridor where PR's office was. Just as his heart rate was beginning to slow, a shadowy figure emerged from Bob Richards' office. Stop. The man turned and Johnston felt a shooting pain in his left shoulder as the .22 ripped through the heavy textured Macintosh raincoat. Johnston slumped to the floor and watched as the thin-legged man sped towards the skylight and what was presumably a pre-arranged escape route. The light began to fade and the next thing Johnston saw was the face of the nurse at Cambridge A&E smiling gently into his gnarled face. Parker was at the far side deep in conversation with a uniformed officer. It was 10 p.m. when Wrightson arrived at the main university entrance and he knew immediately something was up. The cordon of uniformed officers was shielding the entrance and the white tent concealing the cadaver. The forensics team was scurrying about examining the minutiae of the crime scene. Some kind of incident. Yes, son. Somebody has taken a tumble from the attic window. The policeman pointed up to Richard's office. Okay. Thanks. Wrightson had seen enough. That was PR's office and it could not have been an accident. He slowly made his way to the Old Red Lion pub near Cambridge railway station. He ordered a coffee and sat in the semi-private booth near the window. He took out the newly purchased iPad and went into his private email. His message to James Strickland was brief. Been kidnapped. Released. On the run. Bob's dead. In Cambridge. What do I do? Wrightson nervously sipped his coffee and waited. It took half an hour before the reply came. I am in Brazil. A Mosite arranged it for me. There are people in AstraZeneca who want us all dead. There is a policeman called Johnston. He has the notebook. You must meet him and get the notebook. Then fly to Rio on the first available flight. A Mosite will pick you up there and we can rendezvous. The project goes on. It is bigger than all of us. Johnston's email is policelanc.cid.com and his mobile is 0789653321. Email him first. There might be a tap on the phone. The email is protected. If he doesn't reply, then phone me. If anything happens to you, James, get rid of the computer you are using. They will get a trace on me through the email. Then I am also a dead man. James Strickland. Wrightson closed the emails and shut down the computer. He stared out of the window. Where could he stay safe and think? Where could he find D.I. Johnston? Johnston's iPad beeped and turned over, not sure whether it was the bedside monitor. The flashing icon on the iPad told him it was the tablet. He reached out a weary hand and flicked on the email tab. It was from Strickland. Sorry. I said not contact you again, but something has cropped up. James Wrightson has been in touch. He needs to get the notebook and fast. Can you meet him? James Strickland. Johnston labored to single-digit type the reply. Meet him in Golden Lion tomorrow at noon. We'll give him the book. Dr. Rashid was furious on Thursday morning as he watched Johnston don his overcoat and lurch out of the Cambridge Royal Infirmary. He looked like Long John Silver minus the parrot. You will regret these, Mr. Johnston, I promise you. That leg will go septic without hospital attention. Johnston climbed into the back of the black cab. And the slightly seedy-looking driver hurried onto the Golden Lion. As a precaution, Johnston texted Parker with a sketchy update. The Golden Lion was empty except for the gaunt, unshaven young man sitting in the corner. Johnston sidled up to the table. Wrightson. Johnston? Yes. Johnston slipped the leather notebook wrapped in polythene across the table. Wrightson almost smiled in relief. He tucked the book into his inside jacket pocket. I paid my bill. Thanks. Really appreciate your help. Wrightson rose slowly from the table and Johnston could see he was in worse nick than he was himself. Anything else I can do? No. I must be going. Strickland will be in touch with an update. Wrightson hurried out and left Johnston alone to order a triple Talisker and a cheese roll. The train from Cambridge was slow and every passenger getting on and off was a potential assassin. At Heathrow the paranoia was worse. He'd booked on the 3:50 p.m. to Florida via Boston. At Florida a well-dressed man held up a card at the terminal door with a Mosite in bold letters. It was a day later before Wrightson met Strickland in a small apartment in Rio. Wrightson opened the book on the kitchen table and Strickland peered in dismay at the water-damaged pages. How much can we save? Strickland asked. I think there is enough. A visitor to see you, Mr. Schmidt. His name is Mr. Block from Europol. Schmidt had been expecting this ever since they had requested information about his ownership of the containers in Dubrovnik. Schmidt was ice cool as the tall bearded gentleman in the tweed jacket entered. Would you care for some coffee? That would be nice. Anna, coffee please. Now how can I help you, Mr. Block? Well, I am investigating the disappearance of a Mr. Dmitry Bakov. A Macedonian election agent with a finger in more than one pie. And why would I know anything about this gentleman? You own shipping containers in Dubrovnik near the port where he was last seen. And besides, we know he visited you here in Zurich back in September. Schmidt stroked his sizable Teutonic chin and smiled. Yes, that's right, I remember now. He came with a business proposal to export television parts from Macedonia. Unfortunately, I had to turn down his offer and he left. Have you seen him since? No. The door handle creaked. Just leave the coffee on the table, Anna, I will pour them for myself and Mr. Block. Schmidt carefully poured the thick black Robusta from the thin spouted silver pot. Yes. As I was saying, he came, we talked, he left. Did you offer him coffee? Of course, all guests are offered coffee. Was he not an old friend of yours, Mr. Schmidt? I believe you met him in Cyprus in October 2000. Schmidt almost dropped his coffee cup. He pondered how Block and Europol knew about that. Why was he not investigated for the assault rifles he supplied Bokov with? Maybe, there was a blind eye turned because the European powers wanted to see Yugoslavia split asunder. Now that you mentioned it, I might have met him briefly. But I was not friends, as you put it. Block pulled out his wallet. He took out a small photograph. Does this mean anything? Schmidt took the black and white photograph in his sweating hand. He looked at the two men who were smiling as one handed the other an AK-47 assault rifle. Yes. It is me and Bokov. So what? Where is this all leading? What department are you with in Europol? Let me see your ID. Block smiled broadly and flicked through his wallet and produced an ID card. Schmidt took it and began to investigate it fully. Do you like halva, Mr. Schmidt? I have brought you a very nice piece of vanilla halva. All the way from Cyprus. Schmidt unfolded the ID. There was no Europol stamp. There was only a large letter M and under it the name Abraham Block. The halva is made in Israel, then exported to Cyprus. Please have a piece. Block offered Schmidt the halva. No thank you. Abraham. What does the M stand for? Who are you? Mossad, of course. We have been watching you for a long time. In fact, a very long time. And before that we were watching your father. Schmidt felt a horrible churning in the stomach. He made to get up when Block pulled out the concealed Glock pistol and aimed chest high. Schmidt thought about shouting for Anna. But what was she going to do? Are you sure you will not eat some halva? Very nice with a dark Italian coffee. Look, what do you want? Yes. I should not have been involved with Bokov. Can I offer you the value of the deal I had with Bokov? It was worth £1 million. Schmidt was desperate. Block smiled a thin smile. I am going to give you a choice of how to die. You can fall out of the office window, or take a .22 in the stomach, or eat the halva. If it was me, I would eat the halva. It is laced with hemlock, but it was not prepared scientifically. You would have a chance. Especially, if your secretary was quick off the mark. Schmidt slumped back in his leather chair. He glanced at the open window 10 stories high. The gun was still trained. You are a very fair man giving me a chance, he managed ironically. It was more than your father gave the people in Buchenwald. The sins of the father, if they were sins, should not be visited on the son. You have accumulated plenty of sins on your own behalf. Not least of which was killing Mr. Bokov. He was a very good friend to the Israeli government. So good that we paid him a retainer. Block offered the halva. Schmidt hesitated. Block cocked the trigger. Schmidt slowly brought the sweet to his mouth. Block watched carefully as he swallowed the 1-inch square piece. Schmidt slumped forward onto the floor. I will be going now. I will see myself out. Sweet dreams. Schmidt began to jerk like an electrocuted chicken. His legs flailed wildly. Anna. It's Anna, isn't it? Mr. Schmidt has taken unwell. I suggest you attend to him immediately. I will see myself out. Anna ran to her master. Johnston was sitting upright in the bed on the private bay. He chucked the Times down onto Johnston's bed. "What's up? Not printing the Sun today? Thought you needed to develop that lump of gray matter between your ears. That's very thoughtful." Have a glance at page 8 in the business supplement. The headline read: A mosaic to launch a new medical drug treatment, U.S. giant diversifies into pharmaceutical supplies. End. Copyright 2018. If you enjoyed this story, then please leave an Amazon review. Author can be contacted at makoineach@yahoo.co.uk.